Chapter 329. Li Mu looked at Elder Su, and Elder Su also looked at him. The situation was very awkward. In the end, it was Elder Su who broke the awkwardness. He coughed lightly and walked into the courtyard. He said, "I have brought Lord Li's trial letter." Since he did not mention what happened just now, Li Mu naturally would not mention it either. He accepted the trial letter and said, "Thank you, Elder Su." Taoist priest Su Chong said, "In 5 days, when the trial begins, I will inform Lord Li again." Li Mu nodded and said, "Okay." Elder Su cupped his hands and said, "I will take my leave first." Li Mu cupped his hands and returned the greeting. "Take care, Elder Su." After a polite exchange, Elder Su turned and left. In the spiritual snail, the Empress thought for a while and said, "Why don't you capture him and I will teach you how to erase his memory?" Li Mu hurriedly said, "No need, no need." Li Mu represented the Empress in the cooperation with the Fulu school. He could sit down and talk with the Fulu school's headmaster. There was no need to erase Elder Su's memory. Moreover, no one would believe him if he said that he wanted to become the headmaster or headmaster of the Fulu school with just a little theurgy. In fact, Elder Su, who walked out of the small hut, really scoffed at Li Mu's words just now. To become the headmaster of the Fulu school, he first had to become a core disciple of the Fulu school. Just this alone was enough to completely block him out. The fastest way to become a core disciple of the Fulu school was to participate in the trial of the Tao of Talismans. He had to defeat thousands of cultivators who were proficient in the Tao of Talismans and win first place in the trial. This was only the first step of his plan. The second step was to cultivate hard and break through to the creation realm. Only then could he become an elder. The third step was to break through to the Dongxian realm from the creation realm. Only then could he become the headmaster. It was easy to go from divine ability to creation. At most it would take a few decades. Once the magic power was enough, success would follow naturally. However, when the creation realm came to Dongxian, what was tested was one's talent and comprehension. The Fulu school had more than 100 creation elders, but only a few first seats. As for the fourth step, becoming the sect master, he still had to break through to the 7th realm and wait for the current sect master to abdicate before he could succeed the position of sect master. Even if there was such a day, it would be decades or centuries later. By then, the Great Zhou might have had several emperors. Elder Su just smiled lightly before tossing this matter to the back of his mind, and then he flew towards the main peak. The Tao of Talismans trial this time was presided over by him, and he still had many things to do. Inside the small building, the Empress was silent for a while, then said, "I'm sorry, I misunderstood you just now." Although Li Mu was disappointed by the Empress's lack of trust, he did not show it. He said, "It is okay. I can understand your Majesty." As a man, he should be more magnanimous. If he was petty and got angry with the Empress, wouldn't he be like some unreasonable woman? Li Mu tried not to let himself be in the position of a barbaric boyfriend. He was already so magnanimous. He wouldn't have those strange dreams of lying in the Empress's arms at night, right? The next morning, Li Mu sat up from the bed with an expression of doubt on his face. Last night, he was not in the Empress's arms, but the Empress was in his arms. These days, the number of times he dreamed of the Empress was more than the number of times he dreamed of Lu Hanyan. It must be because they talked too often. Li Si said that between men and women, only by maintaining a distance could there be pure friendship. Once the contact became frequent or the distance between them became close, the pure feelings would often become no longer pure. Li Mu decided to reduce the frequency of contact with the Empress, from once a day to once every 2 days. Now that he was far away in the North County, the Empress could not see him. When he returned to Shendu, if he had such strange dreams again and was caught by the Empress, Li Mu could not even imagine the consequences. There were still a few days before the trial. He borrowed a few talisman books from Elder Su and prepared to make a breakthrough. Although Li Mu had already thoroughly grasped nearly 100 types of basic talismans in the past half a month, among the thousands of cultivators that had participated in the trial, besides a small portion that had come to make up the numbers and gain experience, all of them had absolute confidence in their own Tao of Talismans, so Li Mu had no choice but to treat his opponent as a human. 5 days later, on Mount Baiyun, the Talisman Tao trial that was held once every 4 years was about to begin. The Talisman Tao trial was not only a big deal for Mount Baiyun, but also for the entire North County and the surrounding counties. Before and after the Talisman Tao trial, Thousands of cultivators gathered near Mount Baiyun. The demons around the North County had to stay in their nests obediently to avoid unexpected disasters. During this period, even demons and ghosts who had not done anything evil could be killed by the cultivators. The Fulu school's Talisman Dao trial was even crueler than the Great Zhou Court's imperial examinations. The imperial examinations selected 100 out of thousands of people. The Talisman Dao trial often had tens of thousands of participants, but in the end, only less than 50 people could pass the trial. It was difficult to select 1 out of 100 people. Even so, there were still countless cultivators who took part in the trial. There was no other reason. The Fulu school was one of the 6 Taoist sections. The sect was rich in resources and had many powerful cultivators. Joining the Fulu school meant that one would take a supreme shortcut on the path of cultivation in the future. The path of cultivation was a competition of resources. All cultivators wanted to rely on a big tree. The Fulu school was a big tree that attracted not only the 36 counties of the Great Zhou, but also cultivators from other countries. There were more than 6,000 cultivators participating in the Talisman Dao trial this time, more than the imperial examinations in the Great Zhou. It was also the first time that Li Mu saw the foundation of one of the 6 Taoist sections. It was the first time that he saw more than 6,000 cultivators gathered together. In front of a cliff on a mountain peak in the Baiyun mountain range. Li Mu stood in the crowd. In front of the crowd was a cliff. In front of the cliff, clouds curled more than 100 feet. Behind the cliff was another cliff. He could vaguely see Fulu papers fluttering in the wind under the opposite cliff. With the sound of a bell, everyone walked towards the opposite cliff. Most people stepped on the clouds and walked through the cliff safely. There were also a few who stepped into the air and fell off the cliff. Then, they were wrapped in a white cloud and sent down the mountain. Li Mu had a detailed understanding of the Talisman Dao trial, and knew that this was the preparation before the trial. The Fulu school had an age requirement for the cultivators who participated in the trial. Only cultivators below the age of 30 were qualified to participate in the trial. There were many cultivators who participated in the trial every time. Naturally, there would be some who tried to take advantage of the situation by lying about their age to obtain the trial invitation. The Talisman Puppet sect would not spend the effort to check if they were lying before the trial. As long as they walked through this cliff once, it would be obvious who was lying about their age in an attempt to get through. There were Fulu papers on both sides of the cliff. If one's bone age was below the age of 30, they could walk through the cliff safely as if it was flat ground. If one's bone age was above the age of 30, they would fall down as soon as they stepped on the cliff. Then, they would be wrapped in a white cloud and sent down the mountain. Most of the people who participated in the trial walked through safely. Only a few screamed and fell off the cliff. When another group of people saw this, they stood in front of the cliff and began to watch anxiously. Beside the cliff, a young man looked at a muscular man with a big beard and mocked. "Do you think others are blind? You didn't even shave your beard and you want to take advantage of the situation?" The muscular man glanced at him and said in a hoarse voice, "Can't I look old? I'm only 18 today." He snorted coldly and strode into the cliff. Stepping on the white cloud, he safely walked to the other side. The young man's eyes widened. He wondered if the cliff really judged one's bone age. He tentatively took a step forward and after letting out a scream, he fell straight down. These shrill cries caused some people to completely panic, and they didn't dare take another step forward. They turned back along the path they came from with dejection. Li Mu took a step forward and stepped on the white cloud. It was as if he had stepped on solid ground. He easily walked to the other side of the cliff. When he reached the other side, Li Mu realized that this was a huge platform. The platform covered an unknown amount of land. He could not see the end of it. It was as if someone had used great magic to flatten the entire mountain from the mountainside and carve out a platform. On the platform, there were countless stone platforms that were half the height of a person. On the stone platforms, there were writing brushes, yellow paper, cinnabar, and other items. Li Mu walked to the front and found a stone platform. He stood behind the stone platform. The cultivators who passed the cliff quickly found a stone platform and stood still. They were ready to take the first stage of the Talisman Dao trial. At first, there were more than 6,000 people who had a trial letter. Among them, there were only about 100 people who were over the age and wanted to take advantage of the situation. They had already been eliminated at the cliff. There were still nearly 6,000 people who participated in the first stage of the trial. After everyone who passed the cliff found a stone platform and stood still, 3 shining golden words suddenly appeared in the sky in front of the platform. Exorcism Talisman. There was no explanation for this stage. However, from the words in the sky and the items on the stone platforms, it was not difficult to guess that the first stage of the trial was for everyone to draw an exorcism talisman. The exorcism talisman was a yellow grade fulu. It was also one of the most basic fulu. It had many uses. When ordinary people carried it on their bodies, low-level ghosts and monsters would not dare to come close. When the exorcism talisman was turned into talisman water and drank it could cure common colds and various diseases. Almost all cultivators who had learned fulu knew how to draw an exorcism talisman. For many people, this was the first fulu that they had learned. Fulu school was quite friendly to these cultivators. They did not make things difficult for them in the first stage. However, this did not mean that this stage was not difficult at all. There were only 3 sheets of yellow paper on the stone platform. The amount of cinnabar was only enough to draw 3 fulu. There was an incense stick on the stone platform. At a certain moment it lit itself. This meant that all the cultivators had to successfully draw an exorcism talisman within the time it took for an incense stick to burn. Moreover, they only had 3 chances. After failing 3 times, they would not have the materials to draw a talisman. Cultivators being able to draw a fulu and cultivators being able to draw a fulu in one try were 2 completely different concepts. Some people could draw an exorcism talisman, but they had to fail multiple times and waste many sets of materials before succeeding. Such a person could not be considered to have fulu talent. White Cloud Mountain. Main peak. There was a huge screen in the sky above the square. On the screen was the situation on the platform. The elders chatted and laughed as they watched the situation on the screen. How long do you think it will take for these people to successfully draw an exorcism talisman? Those who pass will be able to draw it in half an incense stick's time. After that, even if they can draw it, they will not be able to pass the subsequent trials. I remember that in the past trials, the fastest person to draw this talisman took 20 breaths. It was 12 years ago, right? I still remember that Li Er. He was a true talisman Dao genius. 20 breaths. Many elders in the sect can't do it that fast. As the elders were discussing, a beam of light suddenly lit up on the screen. The square fell silent for a moment before an uproar broke out. Someone finished drawing so quickly? How many breaths have passed this time? Less than 10 breaths. That's way too fast. How is that possible? Could there be a 6th realm cultivator among the cultivators? Is that a senior joking? Everyone looked at the screen, which quickly zoomed in on a certain spot on the platform. The elders widened their eyes, wanting to see who could draw an exorcism talisman in such a short time. However, all they saw was a cloud of fog. Everyone could not help but be stunned. What's going on? Why is there fog on the trial platform? Who can go and see what's happening on the trial platform? Someone reacted quickly and said, "That's not fog on the trial platform. He has a Dharma treasure on him that conceals heavenly secrets." Elder Su stood up abruptly with a stunned expression. "It's him." Chapter 330. On the main peak square, the group of elders looked at the figure shrouded in clouds on the trial platform through the image above, their faces filled with shock. Although the exorcism talisman was the most basic fulu, even they would need 10 or even 20 breaths to complete it. The success of the talisman was mainly related to 2 factors. First, whether or not the talisman could be drawn in one go. Second, whether or not the talisman was stable in the process of drawing. It was not easy to draw the fulu in one go without any ripples in the talisman. One had to ensure the calmness of the heart. If the talisman was slightly impatient, the talisman would be wrong, or the talisman would be too unstable, and the talisman would fail. If the talisman failed, not only would it waste time and energy, it would also waste precious materials. Therefore, in the process of talisman drawing, cultivators would try their best to remain calm and write at a steady pace, ensuring that the talisman was complete and the talisman was stable. Naturally, the talisman drawing speed would not be too fast. To be able to draw the exorcism talisman in 10 breaths, one had to have a high level of cultivation, and one's control of the body and the talisman had reached the peak. Or one had practiced the exorcism talisman for tens of thousands of times. Even if one was in the soul refining stage, they would still be able to draw the talisman quickly and accurately. But generally speaking, no one would spend so much time and energy on a low-level fulu. Regardless of the reason, the fact that this person could complete the first stage of the trial in 10 breaths was enough to attract their attention. Unfortunately, this person was shrouded in clouds, preventing them from seeing his true appearance. One of the main peak elders looked at Elder Su and asked, "Senior Su, this person, could it be?" Elder Su had already come back to his senses. He nodded and said, "Other than him, who else could it be?" On the trial platform, Li Mu finished the last stroke of the exorcism talisman. The stone platform in front of him suddenly lit up. Beside him, a cultivator who was at the critical moment of drawing the talisman was shocked by this abnormality. His hand trembled, and the talisman was crooked. The first talisman paper was ruined. The cultivator looked down at the ruined talisman paper and blurted out, "Mother Fasteris Cur." The stone platform lit up, indicating that the person beside him had successfully completed the Fulu. After that person cursed in his heart, he looked at the young man behind the stone platform with a shocked expression and said in his heart, "How could he be so fast?" He looked at the burning incense in front of the stone platform and didn't dare to think any further. He had already wasted a chance and only had 2 talisman papers left. If he couldn't draw an exorcism talisman before the incense burned out, he would be eliminated in the first stage of the trial. He looked at the man one last time and thought to himself, "I hope you can be as fast in bed." Dozens of breaths after Li Mu drew the exorcism talisman, a faint light began to shine from the trial platform. He looked around. A small number of people had already completed their exorcism talismans, but most of them were still immersed in drawing. Fulu School's first trial was quite interesting. What they tested was the most common Fulu, but the testing method was not ordinary. 1 incense stick and 3 talisman papers. Not only did it require the success rate of the talisman writing, it also required the speed of the talisman writing. For a cultivator who practiced the Tao of Fulu, the success rate of the talisman writing was extremely important. This point was not reflected in low-level Fulu. If the success rate was slightly lower, at most some yellow paper and cinnabar would be wasted. But for high-level Fulu, the talisman papers and talisman writing materials were extremely precious and could not be wasted. If one failed a few times, they might have to gather materials again. Li Mu stood behind the stone platform and waited until the last incense stick on the stone platform burned to ashes. "Wait, I'm just short of 1. Give me another 10 breaths. Give me a chance." The cultivators who had not yet succeeded in drawing talismans all spoke out anxiously. But the stone platform beside them suddenly burst out with a burst of light and swept them away from the trial platform. The stone platform in front of the cultivators who passed the first stage emitted a faint light, and they continued to stay on the trial platform. Li Mu looked around again and found that after the first stage, the number of cultivators on the stone platform had decreased by nearly half. An ordinary exorcism talisman was also able to distinguish so many cultivators. After the bell rang, Elder Su's voice rang in everyone's ears. Those who can draw 10 exorcism talismans within an hour can enter the 3rd stage of the trial. As his voice fell, countless yellow papers and cinnabar flew in from outside the platform and landed on the remaining stone platforms. Li Mu counted the yellow papers on the stone platform in front of him. There were exactly 10 of them. This meant that if one wanted to pass the 2nd stage, he had to ensure a 100% success rate and complete it within an hour. If the difficulty of the first stage was 1, then the difficulty of the 2nd stage was 100. Within the time it took for an incense stick to burn, there were 3 chances to draw an exorcism talisman. If one had some attainments in the Tao of talismans, they could do it. But to ensure that one could draw 10 talismans without making a single mistake was not something a beginner in the Tao of talismans could do. He had to truly and completely master the exorcism talisman, and not rely on luck to draw talismans. If one made a single mistake out of 10 times, all previous efforts would be wasted. This was not only a test of their Tao of talismans, but also their mental fortitude. Those who could maintain their calm under such pressure and successfully draw talismans were the talents that the Fulu school wanted. Of course, it wasn't difficult for Li Mu to discern from these 2 trials that even if the talisman sect was wealthy and overbearing, it wasn't willing to waste resources. So the cultivators that didn't have a high success rate in drawing talismans would be completely eliminated during the first 2 trials. Li Mu picked up his brush and began to draw talismans. On the main peak square, a group of elders and many disciples of the Fulu school were watching the live broadcast of the trial. This stage won't be easy for them. It's not just them. Some disciples of other sects may not be able to draw 10 Fulu talismans without making a single mistake. 12 years ago, that person only took 15 minutes. He was the fastest person to complete the 2nd stage of the trial in all of history. I wonder if there will be any surprises this year. While the crowd was chatting, it didn't take long for another ray of light to appear on the screen. This time, not only the elders, but even the spectating disciples in the square let out a cry of surprise. It's fake, right? Not even 15 minutes? This person can't be an octopus demon, right? Although the exorcism talisman is very simple, drawing 10 of them can't be that fast. On the square, the image zoomed in, and a blurry figure appeared in front of them again. In the next moment, someone exclaimed, "It's him again!" I know. He must know that the first 2 stages of the trial tested the basics of the Fulu. He deliberately practiced it. Give me a year and a half, and if I only practice the exorcism talisman, I could be faster than him. But if he does this, he will be eliminated in the 3rd stage, not to mention the 4th stage. On the square, after a moment of surprise, all the disciples calmed down. It was only an exorcism talisman, and no matter how skilled one was in cultivating it, it was of no great use. At most, one could be a wandering physician in the mortal world or sell protective talismans to deceive mortals. It was impossible to rely on an exorcism talisman to pass the trial in the talisman Tao of the talisman sect's ancestral court. Most of the disciples didn't have a high evaluation of this person's attainments in the Tao of talismans. There were only 2 possibilities for him to be able to draw the exorcism talisman so skillfully. First, his dermic energy was very strong, and it was at least at the 6th level. But how could a 6th-level expert participate in the trial of the Tao of talismans? So this possibility was directly eliminated. Second, his cultivation wasn't high, but he spent a large amount of time practicing the exorcism talisman. Practice makes perfect, and after practicing thousands of times, he could still draw it so skillfully and accurately. But such actions were meaningless. The exorcism talisman was useful to mortals, but it was useless to cultivators. A cultivator with a normal mind wouldn't waste time on it. Maybe this person just wanted to attract everyone's attention in the first 2 stages of the trial. However, the elders in front didn't think so. One of the elders looked at Elder Su and asked, "Senior Su, what do you think?" Elder Su recalled the scene just now and said, "His movements of drawing the exorcism talisman were smooth, and he succeeded in drawing the exorcism talisman in one go. This means that his dermic energy is very stable. There were no gaps between the 10 Fulu talismans, which means that he had a card up his sleeve. If it was him, he definitely wouldn't just be proficient in the exorcism talisman." That elder looked at the fog in the image and said, "His basic skills are very solid, and it's rare among the core disciples. I just don't know if he can pass the 3rd stage. The next stage is testing talent, and not basic skills." It was exceptionally quiet on the trial platform. After Li Mu finished drawing the 10 exorcism talismans, he observed the surrounding cultivators. It was quiet all around, and no strange sounds could be heard. The first 2 stages of the Fulu school's assessment were unusually fair. They didn't differentiate the cultivators based on their cultivation level. They tested the low-grade yellow-level exorcism talisman, the most basic Fulu talisman. Whether it was Dongxian or soul-refining cultivators, they all knew how to draw. No matter how high a grotto profound expert's magic power was, they could only obtain 100 points at most under the situation that the full score was only 100. As for soul-refining cultivators, although their strength was low, as long as they worked hard and performed exceptionally, they could also get the same number of points. Of course, for low-level cultivators, it was definitely more difficult to pass the trial. They were allowed to make mistakes in the first stage, but in the second stage, they couldn't make even the slightest mistake. For this reason, almost all of the cultivators temporarily shut off their hearing to avoid being disturbed by the outside world when they were drawing the exorcism talisman. Sometimes, there would be a mistake, and after a sigh, they would be silently taken away by the stone platform. As time passed, the number of cultivators on the trial platform decreased. In this trial they couldn't rush it, but they couldn't be unhurried either. Drawing the exorcism talisman required a calm mind. Once rushed, it was easy to make a mistake, and one mistake would waste all of their previous efforts. Furthermore, there was a time limit for this stage. If they were calm and slow, it would increase their success rate, but if they exceeded the time limit of 2 hours, they would still be eliminated. There were constantly cultivators making mistakes and being taken away by the stone platform. This made the remaining cultivators even more careful. They didn't dare to try to be fast, and hoped that time would pass slowly. However, the bell for the second stage of the trial still rang on time. Countless stone platforms emitted a burst of light, sweeping away the cultivators who didn't complete the trial on time. There were less than 1,000 cultivators left on the platform. In the second stage of the trial, 2/3 of the cultivators who passed the previous stage were directly eliminated. In just 2 rounds, 5 out of 6 people were eliminated. The trial of the Fulu school was even crueler than the Imperial Court's imperial examinations. Li Mu didn't have to wait long before another golden light lit up the sky in front of him. Chapter 331. The third round of the Talisman Dao trial had begun. Several golden runes appeared in the sky in front of the trial platform. These runes formed a Fulu. The moment he saw the rune, Li Mu had some doubts in his heart. Because he had never seen this Fulu before. Li Mu had already learned all the basic Fulu during his time at Fulu school. He was sure that this Fulu was not any type that he had seen before. The other trial takers on the other platforms also had stunned expressions on their faces. What rune is this? Why have I never seen it before? How do you draw a Fulu that you have never seen before? At this moment, Elder Su's voice was heard. Those who successfully draw this rune within 4 hours will pass the third round and enter the final round of the trial. Countless talisman papers and cinnabar flew in from outside the platform. This time, there were 100 talisman papers. The Talisman Dao trial this time seemed to be different from the previous ones. Li Mu looked up at the golden runes above and somewhat understood the Fulu school's purpose. The first 2 rounds tested the trial taker's basic skills. The third round tested the trial taker's talent. Those common Fulu, even those without talent, could be drawn skillfully after thousands of practice over a long period of time. Passing the first 2 rounds only meant that they had a solid foundation in the exorcism talisman. It did not mean anything. But for a new Fulu, the result was different. Those with outstanding talent in the talisman Dao might be able to grasp it in a few hours. Those with average talent would need a few days, or even 10 days to half a month. This Fulu was not in the talisman books that Li Mu had seen before. It should be a new Fulu created by the Fulu school. He had never seen a Fulu before. He did not know the order of writing the runes or the strength of his dermic powers when writing the runes. He had to test them one by one. Li Mu picked up the brush and dipped it in cinnabar. He closed his eyes and pondered for a while before starting to write. He finished drawing the runes in one go, but his magic power was not sealed in the rune paper. This meant that he had failed. I can't inject my magic power. The order of the runes is wrong. Li Mu thought for a moment and picked up the brush again. He changed the order of writing the runes, but he still couldn't seal the magic power. Li Mu lowered his head and looked at the ruined talisman paper. He thought to himself, during the last 2 strokes, the mana leaked out. It's because the mana input was too strong and exceeded the upper limit of this talisman. Again, on the square of the main peak, an elder who had been staring at Li Mu said, "He has already failed twice." Another elder Taoist priest said, "It's normal. A new Fulu, even if you and I have it in our hands, we can't succeed in one try. We have to try many times. However, this talisman is not complicated. If he really has talent in the Talisman Dao, 4 hours is enough. After 4 hours, even if he succeeds, his future achievements will be limited." He looked at Elder Su and asked, "Senior Su, do you think he can succeed?" Elder Su shook his head and said, "I don't know. However, if he really wins this trial, there will be a big problem." At this moment, if he still didn't know that Li Mu's a little and his understanding of the a little were not the same, he would not be qualified to be an elder of the main peak. From the first 2 trials, Li Mu's performance showed that he was definitely not a Talisman Dao newbie. And in the third trial, he only failed twice and found the correct order of writing the runes. As long as he tried a few more times, he would be able to find the limit of his dermic powers and successfully write the runes. In this way, he could immediately enter the 4th trial, which was also the last trial. This seemed to be getting closer to his plan of seizing power in the Fulu school. At that time, Elder Su only thought that it was an unrealistic joke. It was not until he saw Li Mu overcome all obstacles in the Talisman Dao trial that a sense of crisis arose in his heart. He couldn't be serious, could he? Just as this concern arose in Elder Su's heart, on the screen above his head, a ray of light swept across. The main peak square was in an uproar. It appeared. Who is so fast? This is the new Fulu that was just designed by the headmaster. No one can know in advance. I can't see his face clearly. Why is it a cloud of fog? Isn't this the person who was the fastest in the first and second trials? Li Mu could not hear the discussions of the people in the main peak square. In his 7th trial, he finally succeeded in sealing his dermic powers into the talisman paper and drew the nameless Fu Lu. Under extreme calmness and without any fluctuations in his heart, drawing talismans was simply successful. He already had some doubts in his heart that in the other world, the art of tranquility did not exist for the purpose of drawing talismans. The moment he finished drawing the Fu Lu and put down the brush, the stone platform beside him rolled him up and flew off the platform, landing on another mountain peak. The stone platform put him down and returned along the original path. Elder Su stood on the mountain peak and looked at Li Mu with a complicated expression. He cupped his hands and said, "Congratulations, Lord Li, for being the first to complete the first 3 trials." Li Mu cupped his hands and returned the greeting. He said politely, "I was lucky." He looked at Elder Su and asked, "What is the 4th trial?" Elder Su pointed to the front and said, "This is the 4th trial." Li Mu looked in the direction that he pointed and saw rows of stone steps that extended into the depths of the clouds. Taoist priest Su Chong said, "This 4th trial is both a test for the trial taker and also a creation for the trial taker. As for how much you can benefit from this trial, it depends on the strength of each trial taker." Li Mu said uncertainly, "Creation." Taoist priest Su Chong said, "You will know when you walk up the stone steps." Li Mu stepped onto the first stone step, and the scenery in front of him suddenly changed. He appeared in a strange world, and when he looked around, all he saw was a vast expanse of whiteness. There was only a table in front of him, and on the table was a piece of paper, a brush and cinnabar. A familiar Fu Lu floated in front of the table. It was another exorcism talisman. Clearly, this was another trial for him to draw talismans. Li Mu was about to vomit from drawing exorcism talismans today, but he could only hold back his disgust. He picked up the brush and finished drawing an exorcism talisman in a few breaths. The scenery in front of him disappeared and he returned to the steps again. Li Mu walked to the next step and appeared in the vast expanse of whiteness again. This time, a brand new Fu Lu appeared in front of him. Demon-seeking talisman. Every step here seemed to correspond to a Fu Lu. Li Mu finished drawing the demon-seeking talisman. When he walked to the 3rd step, what he saw was the soul fixation talisman. As he guessed, the first trial tested one's basic skills, the 3rd trial tested one's talent, and the 4th trial tested one's basic skills and talent together. There was only one chance for each step. He had to be careful with every step. If he made a mistake in drawing the Fu Lu, the talisman Dao trial would end here. Even Li Mu did not dare to be careless. He treated the Fu Lu of each step very seriously. When Li Mu walked to the 10th step, many people had passed the 3rd trial and landed at the foot of the mountain. Some people walked up the steps. After a few steps, their bodies would be teleported out and they would stand at the side with a disappointed expression. Even a talisman Dao expert could not guarantee that he would succeed every time. No matter how careful he was, he still made a mistake on the 6th Fu Lu. The 4th trial was really too difficult. However, he did not completely give up because others might not do better than him. He still had a chance. He stood at the foot of the mountain and looked at the figure who had walked up more than a dozen steps. A deep sense of powerlessness arose in his heart. Before coming to the Fu Lu school, he thought that he was a talisman Dao genius. After passing 3 trials in a row, his confidence soared. He thought that if he worked hard, he might have a chance to become a core disciple. However, he suffered a huge blow when he just entered the 4th trial. The figure on the stone steps of the mountain path made him deeply understand the gap between people. Time slowly passed and more people passed the 3rd stage. 4 hours later, the trial takers who had yet to fully comprehend the talisman on the trial platform had lost their chance to pass the 3rd stage. At this time, there were less than 100 people at the foot of the mountain. The 3rd trial eliminated 90% of the trial takers. Out of the 6,000 people, only 3 trials left 2 digits. Among these people, there were dozens of people who would be eliminated in the 4th trial. They had already learned the rules of the 4th trial from the trial takers who had participated in the 4th trial. They estimated in their hearts which step they could reach. Occasionally, they would look up at the figure at the front and secretly curse him as a monster. On the stone steps, Li Mu had already walked up the 43rd step. This meant that he had drawn 43 Fu Lu without missing a single detail. He stayed on this step for a full quarter of an hour and did not take another step forward. In the world of cultivation, the Fu Lu was divided into heaven, Earth, Xian, and Huang. Each stage was further divided into upper, middle, and lower grades. There were a total of 4 stages and 12 grades. With Li Mu's current spiritual power, he could only draw a Xian upper grade Fu Lu. As for the Earth lower grade Fu Lu, he would need to be at least at the 5th level of cultivation to draw one. The last Fu Lu he drew was a Xian upper grade. The next step would probably be an Earth Fu Lu. With his current spiritual power, it was impossible to draw one. Li Mu looked back and realized that the people below had at most reached the 10th step. It was almost impossible for them to continue to reach the 30th step without making any mistakes. The current him had already won. However, Li Mu still wanted to try. At most, he would fail and be sent down the mountain. But before that, he needed to rest for a while to recover his spiritual power. After drawing more than 40 Fu Lu in a row, his spiritual power was about to be depleted. Even the donkey in the workshop would not dare to work so hard. If it was not for the fact that he was determined to get that talisman, he would have already given up on the 30th step. The higher the step, the more insurance. He sat cross-legged on the stone step and meditated to recover his spiritual power. After an unknown amount of time, Li Mu suddenly felt movement beside him. He opened his eyes and saw a young man walking to the 43rd step he was on. The young man glanced at him and said, "Hey, make way." Li Mu was shocked. This person was clearly also a cultivator participating in the trial. He actually also reached the 43rd step. Sure enough, he could not underestimate the heroes of the world. No one knew better than him how difficult it was to reach here from the first step. If not for the clear heart mantra, Li Mu would have stopped long ago. That person walked to the middle of the 43rd step and closed his eyes. After 10 breaths, he opened his eyes again. Li Mu narrowed his eyes. He was still standing here and was not sent down. This meant that he had already drawn the 43rd Fu Lu. That person did not even look at Li Mu and walked to the next step. After a while, he opened his eyes again and stepped onto the 45th step. On the square of the main peak, many disciples and elders had looks of disbelief on their faces. In the past, it was already a surprise to have someone reach the 20th step. This year, someone actually reached the 40th step, and there are 2 of them. Who's the one who caught up from behind? He looks so young. He took less time to reach each step than the first person. I wonder which step he will reach in the end? In the Dao Palace on the main peak, several first seats and the talisman puppet sect leader also had an image in front of them. The image depicted the situation on the stone steps. At this moment, Li Mu, whose entire body was covered in fog, stopped at the 43rd step. That young man had already reached the 47th step. Hyun Jinko looked at the figure at the front and said, "There's something wrong with this person." The Fu Lu school's first seat looked at the person at the front through the mystic light technique. A golden light flashed in his eyes as he shook his head and said, "Let's not bother about him for now." He looked at Li Mu with admiration and said, "It's Li Mu who really surprised me." Hyun Jinko nodded and said with a strange look in his eyes, "It's not just a surprise. It's simply unbelievable. If I could turn back time, I would kidnap him even if I had to. He has the hope of the Fu Lu school." Zhang Yongzi looked at the person at the front and said, "I wonder who is so bold to come to White Cloud Mountain and cause trouble. Won't this talisman Dao trial become a joke because of him?" The Fu Lu school's headmaster looked at Li Mu and said with a smile, "That might not be the case." On the 43rd step, Li Mu looked ahead, took a deep breath, and took a step forward. Chapter 332. Taking a step forward, Li Mu once again appeared in that vast white world. The moment he entered, Li Mu's gaze landed on the Fu Lu floating in front of the table. Then he sighed softly. This was a purple heaven thunder talisman. As he expected, from the 44th stone step onwards, he would have to write the earth-level Fu Lu. The purple heaven thunder talisman was the most common representation of the earth-level Fu Lu. The purple heaven thunder technique was a 5th-level abhijna. Li Mu could borrow the confrontation technique to release the purple heaven thunder, but with his own mana, he could not directly use it. The Fu Lu was nothing more than a ceiling of spells. Spells that he could not use naturally could not be made into talismans. Therefore, at present, he could not draw the purple heaven thunder talisman. The young man in front of him, although he looked like he only had spirit concentration, he must have hidden his cultivation level. However, this was also because his skills were not as good as others. There was nothing to complain about. If he could not pass the trial and get the talisman, He could only swallow his pride and see if he could get one from the Fulu school. Li Mu himself did not have much prestige in the Fulu school, but the Empress did. Using the tiger's skin to pull the banner was his strength. Li Mu cast away these distracting thoughts. Even though he knew it was impossible, he still had to try. If he failed, he would be transported to the lowest stone step like most people. He was about to pick up the talisman pen, but his hand suddenly stopped. The talisman pen on the table seemed to be different from the ones before. Before the 43rd step, he had used a normal talisman pen. The body of the pen was made of wood, and there were runes carved on it. This was to ensure that the cultivator's mana would not destroy the talisman pen when he was using the talisman. At this moment, the talisman pen in his hand seemed to be made of metal but not metal, wood but not wood. Holding it in his hand, it seemed to be weightless. More importantly, after holding the pen, Li Mu had an illusion that the mana in his body seemed to have broken through the bottleneck of the Abhijna and reached the creation realm. He looked at the purple heaven thunder talisman again, and saw that the talisman had disappeared. He started to draw again from the beginning. The order of the purple heaven thunder talisman was gradually imprinted in his mind. Li Mu stared blankly at the strange phenomenon in front of him. It was only now that he understood what Elder Su meant. The 4th stage was both a trial by fire, and also good fortune. With Li Mu's own magic power, he could only reach the 43rd step. The reason why he couldn't move forward wasn't because of his talent or any other reason, but because his cultivation was limited. But from the first 3 trials, the Fulu school did not care about the cultivation of the trial takers. The first and second trials tested the most basic exorcism talisman. The 3rd trial tested the Fulu. Although it was a new Fulu that he had never seen before, the dermic powers required to write it did not exceed the exorcism talisman. In the 4th trial, Li Mu wrote the Fulu. When he reached the limit of his own dermic powers, the rules of the trial seemed to change. He had never drawn the purple heaven thunder talisman before, and did not know the order of the talisman. He also did not have the dermic powers to write the talisman. But in this trial, the Fulu school had given him everything he needed. All he had to do was control his dermic powers and write the talisman step by step. It was probably the same for the cultivators behind him. The Tao of Fulu. Writing the talisman was not difficult, and controlling the dermic powers was not difficult. The difficult part was to smoothly write the talisman while ensuring that the dermic powers of each talisman were stable. The transition of dermic powers between different talismans was a problem of multitasking. The higher the level of the Fulu, the more complex the talisman was. The more dermic powers changed, and the higher the probability of failure. At this time, the use of talent was revealed. Li Mu did not have much talent, but he had a cheat. He held the talisman brush and did not immediately start writing the talisman. Instead, he practiced dozens of times in the void and memorized the talisman characters of the purple heaven thunder talisman. Then, without using the talisman materials, he felt the process of the dermic powers changing as he wrote the talisman. He repeated this dozens of times before he looked at the talisman paper on the table. He lifted the brush and began to write slowly. At the main peak of Mount Baiyun, in the Dao Palace, Hyun Jinko closed his eyes. He also held a talisman brush in his hand. His wrist moved slowly in the void, but it did not seem to be of his own accord. In the art of dark light, Li Mu's body was still covered in a cloud of fog. But if one looked closely at the hand that extended out of the fog, one would realize that his hand and Hyun Jinko's hand moved in the same direction. After a while, Hyun Jinko opened his eyes and said, "The talisman is complete." The Fulu school recruited disciples not based on cultivation, but on talent. In the 4th stage, when the Fulu that the trial taker wrote exceeded the limits of his dermic powers, the peak masters would lend their dermic powers and insights to them. This was also a fortune that the Fulu school gave to the trial takers. They had worked hard to reach the 4th stage. Even if they could not enter the Fulu school in the end, they would still have some insights into the Fulu Dao. Over the millennia, countless people were inspired by this and created new Fulu Dao. They established their own sects outside and became the external branches of the Fulu school. For the ancestral court, the trial of the Dao of Talisman was not only a selection of disciples, but also a way to pass on the Dao. The ancestral court of the Fulu school was established. Apart from strengthening the sect, it also had the heavy responsibility of spreading the Dao of Talisman. The peak master of the Jade Emperor Peak, Zhang Yongzi, looked at the scene in the dark light technique and said, "Even if he borrowed your dermic powers and insights, It is still incredible that he could draw the purple sky thunder talisman on his first try. Hyun Jinko's eyes were filled with anticipation. He said, I wonder what his final step will be. In the white world, Li Mu slowly put away his brush. The Fu Lu on the table was complete. The scenery in front of him changed again, and he returned to the 44th stone step. The fourth stage of the trial was different from what he had imagined. He did not need to worry about his dermic powers, nor did he need to worry about the order of the talismans. The only thing he needed to do was to maintain an extreme calmness in his heart and write the talismans step by step. In theory, as long as there was no limit to the amount of dermic powers he could use, he could walk as many steps as there were on the stone steps. Li Mu raised his head and took a look. The young man from before had already disappeared beyond the 50th step. However, he was not worried and slowly walked up to the 45th step. In the square in front of the main peak, everyone's gaze was on the two figures left on the stone steps. Apart from these two people, all the other trial challengers had already completed the final trial. The strongest among them had only passed the 15th step. The first person to pass the first three stages, the figure shrouded in fog in the scene, had already reached the 45th step. As for the young man who came later, he was already beyond the 50th step. Not to mention the ordinary disciples, even the elders of the sect were witnessing such a scene for the first time. Once again in this strange world, Li Mu's mood was completely relaxed as he faced the sword talisman. Elder Su was right. The fourth stage of the trial was indeed an opportunity. Sure, Mu didn't have the ability to draw these magic charms by himself. However, he was bound to gain a lot of insights after this experience. So, he could draw these magic charms after his cultivation had advanced. Then it would be easy for him to do so. Purple Cloud Thunder Talisman, Sword Talisman, Soul Lock Talisman, Frost Talisman, Fire Dragon Talisman. Li Mu walked up the higher step by step. When he looked ahead, the young man's figure could already be seen. A few steps in front of him, the young man looked back. His usually calm face finally showed some seriousness. In the palace of the main peak, several heads and the headmaster of the Fulu school had been silent for a long time. Not long after, Hyun Jinko opened his eyes and said, a few more steps and it will be the heaven-level Fulu. To draw an earth-level Fulu, one had to be at least in the creation realm. The creation realm referred to the elders of the Fulu school, people who had spent their lives studying the Fulu Dao. Non-cultivators of the Fulu school, even if they were in Dongxian, might not be able to draw an earth-level Fulu. As for the heaven-level Fulu, only the heads of the Fulu school and above could maintain a high success rate. Because the materials for talismans were precious and rare, the entire Fulu school could only produce a few in a year. At this moment, the young man in the first place took another step forward and reached the heaven-level Fulu. Before this, no one had ever reached this step. Zhang Yongzi looked at the headmaster of the Fulu school and said, Senior brother, the heaven-level materials are precious. Should we stop this person? The headmaster of the Fulu school shook his head and said, if the news of stopping the trial spread, the Fulu school would become a joke in the cultivation world. As soon as he finished speaking, the young man had already stepped onto the next step. This time, he stayed there for almost an hour before he finally opened his eyes. His body was still in place, indicating that he had drawn a Fulu of this step. At the same time, Li Mu had also reached the next step. At this step, the Fulu he had drawn had already reached the high grade of the earth level. One more step and it would be the heaven-level Fulu. The young man in front of him had already drawn a heaven-level Fulu. If he did not have the same secret as Li Mu, then he must have hidden his cultivation level. His true cultivation level should be above that of Dongxian. The cliff of the first stage of the trial could test one's bone age and filter out the majority of people who wanted to fish in troubled waters. However, it could not do anything to true experts. This person might have come to cause trouble for the Fulu school. For the time being, Li Mu did not know how much courage this person had. He only knew that if he wanted to obtain that one and only talisman, he would have to walk in front of this person. Without hesitation, he lifted his foot and stepped onto the next step. In the strange space, Li Mu's body appeared once again. In the air in front of the table, golden light formed a Fulu. This Fulu was formed from countless complex runes. Even if an ordinary person only glanced at it, they would feel their heads swell. It was no wonder that heaven-level Fulu was so difficult to form into a talisman. Even Dongxian and Transcendence could not guarantee the success rate. These runes were too complex. It was very difficult to guarantee that there would be no mistakes. Even the slightest mistake would cause all the previous efforts to be wasted. The precious materials and the extremely low success rate caused the Fulu school to only produce a few in a year. It was no wonder that when Yuzhen Zi extorted that head, his expression was so pained. For a peak head, this level of Fulu was no different from cutting off his flesh. This time, Li Mu was not in a hurry to draw a talisman. Instead, he looked around and sized up this strange world. As far as his eyes could see, everything was white. At first, Li Mu thought that this was some kind of illusion. Later on, he gradually realized that this should be a flask heaven space. The table in front of him was real. The talisman brush, talisman paper, talisman materials were all real. The Fulu that was drawn was also real. The Fulu school had really invested a lot in this trial. The materials needed to make a heaven-level Fulu talisman liquid were all wasted. It was a great loss. The young man in front of Li Mu had clearly succeeded. If Li Mu wanted to be in the same position as him, he would have to draw this heaven-level Fulu. Li Mu slowly let out a sigh of relief. He chanted the heart-calming mantra again and began to study this Fulu composed of complex talisman characters. 2 hours later, on the 55th stone step, Li Mu slowly opened his eyes. Next to him, the young man did not move forward. Instead, he looked at Li Mu with deep shock in his turbid eyes. With his half-step transcendence cultivation, he still needed to use all his strength and a certain amount of luck to be able to draw a low-grade heaven-level Fulu. How could he not see that this person's true strength was only in his divine arts? Even if he didn't use his magic power or comprehension to draw a talisman, this Fulu was truly drawn by him. A strange light flashed in the young man's eyes. At this moment, the person in front of him gave him the feeling of a 3-year-old child holding a 2-foot-long spear and performing a set of spear techniques that even he felt inferior to. He glanced at Li Mu and walked up the next step. Li Mu observed his back and found that this person's body was between illusory and real. It seemed that his guess was right. What was left behind on the stone steps was only a shadow. His body had entered another space. The fourth trial seemed to be on this mountain peak, but it was actually in the flask heaven space created by the upper realm powerhouses of the Fulu school. Li Mu meditated on the spot. Not long after, the young man's figure on the stone steps in front of him suddenly solidified. In the next moment, his body was teleported out. Obviously, he'd failed in this grade of talisman. The young man appeared below with a gloomy face. He looked up at the remaining figure on the stone steps. There was no one in front of him. Li Mu sighed in relief and slowly stood up. If this person advanced another step, the pressure would be great. If he failed on this step, Li Mu would have to successfully draw the Fulu of the next stone step and successfully obtain the talisman. At this time, in the main peak's palace, several heads finally breathed a sigh of relief. That person has finally failed. How can it be so easy? Even if the head teacher personally makes a move, I'm afraid he can't guarantee it. Li Mu has been at ease all this time. The next Fulu should not be difficult for him. Hyun Jinko was about to pick up the brush when the Fulu school's head teacher suddenly walked to his side and said, "Let me do it." Hyun Jinko smiled and said, "Senior brother, don't worry. I can still help him with the spiritual power and comprehension of the Fulu school." The Fulu school's head teacher looked at him and smiled without saying anything. Hyun Jinko was stunned and said in disbelief, "Senior brother, are you thinking of?" Li Mu stood on the 55th step, guessing in his heart. According to his experience, on the next step he would need to draw a low-grade heaven step Fulu or even a medium-grade heaven step. However, judging from how quickly that young man was eliminated, the latter was more likely. He wasn't worried about this. So long as the talisman brush was able to provide him with sufficient dermic energy, then it wouldn't be a problem even if it was a mid-grade heaven-ranked talisman brush. With that thought in mind, he slowly took a step forward. It was still a familiar space. Li Mu looked at the empty space in front of the table. Amidst the golden light, Li Mu felt a wave of dizziness and took a few steps back. He looked at the extremely complicated rune in front of him and stood there in shock. He thought that a low-grade heaven-ranked Fulu was already complicated enough, but he didn't expect that he was too naive. At this moment, Li Mu felt like he had just learned about multipliers and was asked to solve advanced mathematics problems using integral and differential theory. Chapter 333. Li Mu looked at the mysterious runes in the flask space and was speechless. In the main peak's Taoist palace, the first seats were also shocked by the head teacher's actions. Hyun Jinko said in disbelief. Senior brother head teacher, isn't the gap too big? In today's cultivation world, including our Fulu school, I've never heard of anyone who could draw a saint-level Fulu. Jade Emperor Peak's first seat Wang Yongzi said. The saint-level rune liquid is too precious. If it's used to draw a saint-level Fulu, you can draw more than 10 middle-level or upper-level ones. Songling Peak's first seat Master Ashenpine hesitated for a moment and also advised, in the fourth stage of the trial, the Fulu of the same level should be the same. One middle-level heaven level and the other saint level. Isn't it a little unfair? Fulu School's head teacher looked at them with a deep gaze and said, the middle-level heaven level might not be his limit. I want to take a gamble. They thought for a moment and understood the head teacher's meaning. The person that concealed his identity earlier had already stopped at this level. If Li Mu was able to draw a mid-grade heaven-rank talisman at this level, then he would be the first in the Tao of Talismans trial this time. People who could draw a middle-level heaven-level Fulu were rare in Fulu School. Other than the head teacher, the 7 first seats only had less than a 10% chance of success. However, although it was rare, it still existed. However, to draw a saint-level Fulu, one's cultivation had to be in the upper realm. In the entire Fulu School, only the head teacher and the 2 grand elders had this kind of power. Moreover, having the power to draw a talisman did not mean that the talisman would succeed. The success rate of drawing a saint-level Fulu talisman was less than 10%. The materials for a saint-level talisman were extremely precious and could not be wasted. The materials used to draw a saint-level Fulu could be used to draw more than 10 heaven-level Fulu. They would usually choose to use them to create a heaven-level talisman. Now, the head teacher was giving the materials that he was reluctant to use to a 4th realm cultivator? Although the first seats were astonished, they didn't say anything. Based on their understanding of the sect leader, if he wasn't certain, he wouldn't take such a risk. He was willing to gamble with Li Mu this time, perhaps because he had already calculated some clues. Everyone looked at the image of the mystic light technique with anticipation. Within the flask space, Li Mu had yet to recover from the shock. No wonder that person failed so quickly. Mother Fastris Kerr. Was this talisman drawn by a human? Li Mu even guessed that this Fulu was not a middle-grade heaven-class item, but a high-grade one. It was simply something the Fulu school used to make things difficult for people. Just looking at the runes gave him a headache, not to mention writing runes. Li Mu wanted to give up at the first moment, but he forced himself to hold back. He could not give up. The person from before had stopped at this stage. If he gave up, he would only be able to fight to a draw with him. It was still unknown who would emerge victorious in the end. However, for Li Qing's sake, he had to get this talisman. Li Mu took a deep breath and endured the dizziness as he looked at the Fulu. On the main peak of Mount Baiyun, 3 days had passed. The crowd in the square gathered and dispersed, then gathered again. At this time, there were only a dozen people standing in the square, looking up at the image in the sky. He's been standing there for 3 days. When will it end? If you're not confident, just give up. There's no point in continuing like this. In the image, the figure standing on the stone steps, shrouded in clouds and mist, had been standing there for 3 whole days. This had never happened in the past trials. Everyone on Mount Baiyun was waiting for him alone. Below the stone steps, nearly 100 people sat cross-legged and meditated, occasionally looking up. 3 days was nothing to cultivators. Those who had not walked the stone steps personally did not know how difficult it was to climb each step. They only had respect for those who could reach the 50th step. The young man standing at the bottom of the stone steps had been looking at Li Mu for 3 whole days. There was no anxiety on his face as he looked calmly at Li Mu's back. There was a hint of suspicion in his eyes as he muttered, "It's been 3 days. What the hell is Xian Jizi doing?" According to the rules of the Tao of Talismans trial, a cultivator could stay on every step for a maximum of 6 hours. If he hadn't started writing talismans after 6 hours had passed, then he would be directly teleported to the bottom and the trial would be terminated. However, the junior that he could not see through had been standing on the 56th step for 3 whole days. He could not figure it out. He acknowledged the junior's strength. There was no reason for him to be so careful with a mere heaven-grade golden armor divine Ami talisman. If he could not draw it, he could not draw it even if he stood there for 3 years, let alone 3 days. If he succeeded, he would have succeeded 3 days ago. If he failed, he would have failed 3 days ago. How could he drag it out until today? Tao Palace of the main peak. Several heads, including the Fulu school's headmaster, had not taken a single step out of the palace during these 3 days. In the scene shown by the profound light technique, Li Mu was holding a talisman brush and drawing a certain talisman in the air. He had already drawn it a few thousand times. His face was pale and his aura was weak. His eyes were bloodshot, but his gaze was increasingly confident. At a certain moment, Li Mu sat down cross-legged and closed his eyes. He threw a few pills into his mouth and began to quickly recover his spirit. After a quarter of an hour, he stood up again and walked to the table. There was a talisman paper on the table. This talisman paper was several times larger than an ordinary talisman paper. It was not yellow paper. The talisman paper itself emitted bursts of spiritual energy. It should be made from the wood pulp of some kind of precious tree. At the corner of the table, there was a jade bowl filled with golden talisman liquid. 4 Fulu below the earth stage, one could use cinnabar to draw talismans. For those above the earth stage, one needed a special talisman liquid. This golden talisman liquid emitted a faint fragrance. Li Mu swallowed his saliva and recited the clear heart technique. Only then did he resist the urge to drink it in one gulp. The higher the level of the Fulu, the stronger the spiritual energy contained in the spirit liquid. This bowl of spirit liquid was enough to make his body explode. After adjusting his state to its peak, Li Mu picked up the talisman brush and prepared to draw talismans. Because there was only one chance for the trial, he had already practiced the Fulu's talisman thousands of times in the past 3 days. He had already memorized it by heart and would not make a mistake. As for spiritual energy, he did not know how this talisman brush worked. It could actually draw on the spiritual energy of the Fulu school's experts. Li Mu guessed that the one who provided him with the spiritual energy should be one of the heads. He had never controlled such powerful spiritual energy. It even gave him the illusion that he could fight with the Empress. He had not contacted the Empress for 3 days. In this flask space, the spiritual snail could not send messages. Moreover, there was a live broadcast of the trial using the dark light technique. Li Mu could not chat with the Empress. He cast these thoughts aside. After calming down, he began to focus on drawing talismans. He held the talisman brush, controlled the majestic spiritual energy, and made the first stroke. In the Taoist palace, the heads of the peaks were also extremely focused. In the Tao of Fulu, one must acknowledge the existence of talent. Talent was more important than hard work. This was also the common understanding of everyone. Li Mu's talent in the Tao of talismans was rare in the world. However, what he was drawing now was a saint-level Fulu. There were originally 6 levels of Fulu. People only knew about the heaven, earth, black, and yellow, but not the divine. This was because the last 2 levels of Fulu were rarely seen. The Fulu school had saint-level Fulu, but that was left behind by the sect's seniors hundreds of years ago. In these hundreds of years, countless experts in the Fulu school had not been able to draw a single saint-level Fulu. Could this young man in the drawing possibly add a saint-level Fulu to the Fulu school? In the flask space, Li Mu was fully focused on drawing. Although this Fulu was complicated, after 3 days of practice, he was already very familiar with it. He had even developed muscle memory. With his eyes closed and without thinking, he could draw it out instinctively. Of course, he was not so careless. There was only one chance. If he made a mistake, he would have to fight an extra round with that unidentified young man. His opponent was most likely an old monster. This was Li Mu's only chance. Li Mu concentrated, seriously writing the runes and carefully controlling his spiritual energy. This was very taxing on his mind. Li Mu's face was pale, and his clothes were soaked in sweat. However, he still gritted his teeth and persevered. When he reached the last stroke of the last rune, Li Mu held his breath and focused, gently placing the brush down. The talisman paper was unharmed, the brush was unharmed, and his spiritual energy did not leak out. It was all sealed in the Fulu. Puff! Li Mu spat out a mouthful of blood and collapsed to the ground. This was caused by overdrawing his mind for a long time. The exhaustion of this Fulu on his mind was far beyond his imagination. His figure flashed, and he fell on the stone steps. He's out. He's finally out. He wasn't teleported, he succeeded. 3 days, 3 whole days. What kind of Fulu did he draw? On the main peak square, below the stone steps, countless people exclaimed. The 3 days of waiting had finally come to an end. However, before they could say anything, They seemed to sense something and looked up at the sky. The White Cloud Mountain was the ancestral court of the Talisman sect. The weather was as clear as day for hundreds of years, and every day was a beautiful day. However, today, thick dark clouds suddenly gathered in the sky. The dark clouds gathered at an extremely fast speed. In a few breaths, they occupied the entire sky above everyone's heads. In the dark clouds, lightning snakes danced wildly like giant dragons. Under the dark clouds, whether it was the disciples of White Cloud Mountain or the trial takers, they all felt as if a huge rock was pressing down on their hearts, making it difficult for them to breathe. Everyone's faces were filled with horror. This was a scene they had never seen before in their lives. Below the stone steps, the young man's expression changed greatly after a short moment of shock. He said in shock, "Heavenly tribulation, this is the heavenly tribulation of a saint-level Fulu. A saint-level Fulu has descended." As if realizing something, he suddenly turned his head and looked at Li Mu, who was above the stone steps. Could it be that he had been drawing a saint-level Fulu for the past 3 days? Li Mu sat on the stone steps and looked at the dark clouds in the sky, as well as the lightning dragons that were so thick that they made people tremble. He suddenly had an illusion. This thing seemed to be coming for him. If he was struck by the several feet thick lightning, no, even if it was just a graze, he would end up like Zhou Chu, or even worse than Zhou Chu. Just as this thought appeared in Li Mu's mind, he saw several auras rising into the sky from the main peak. At the same time, the Dao bell buzzed and flew into the sky. In the blink of an eye, it became hundreds and thousands of times bigger, completely enveloping the entire White Cloud Mountain. Chapter 334. The Dao bell covered the sky and completely enveloped White Cloud Mountain. On White Cloud Mountain, the disciples and trial takers looked up and saw a huge illusory and transparent bell shadow. Although there was a long crack on the bell shadow, it still gave the disciples of White Cloud Mountain an incomparable sense of security. Outside the law bell were dark clouds that were so low that one would feel suffocated just by looking at them. Lightning danced wildly in the dark clouds. Some were as thin as pythons, while others were as thick as dragons. They constantly swam in the dark clouds and eventually poured down on White Cloud Mountain. Countless bolts of lightning enveloped White Cloud Mountain as if it was the end of the world. When the lightning landed on the Dao bell, it was completely absorbed. The Dao bell's shadow became even more illusory, but it still firmly enveloped White Cloud Mountain. The few figures that rushed into the sky were the FLU school's headmaster and the 5 first seats. After releasing the first wave of lightning, more lightning began to brew in the dark clouds. The FLU school's headmaster and the 5 first seats flew into the dark clouds. They heard continuous rumbling sounds coming from the dark clouds, revealing a rainbow-colored Dharma spell light. The lightning in the dark clouds became fewer and fewer. Li Mu sat on the stone steps below and looked up at the strange phenomenon in the sky. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that something was amiss. The Talisman Sutra mentioned that the FLU of the world was divided into 6 grades: Yellow, Mystic, Earth and Heaven. Above them were Saint level and Divine level. Most cultivators only knew about Heaven, Earth, Mystic, and Yellow because the first 4 grades were the most common. This was the best explanation based on the ability of writing talismans and the ability to conserve materials. The difficulty of inscribing talismans increased exponentially with each rank. 4 yellow-rank talismans. Once low-level cultivators familiarized themselves with them, they would be able to complete 100% of the talismans. As long as they had enough yellow paper and cinnabar, they would be able to inscribe yellow-rank talismans. However, even a transcendent expert couldn't guarantee a success rate for Heaven-level FLU. The success rate for Saint-level FLU was so low that the materials for writing talismans were basically given for free. After diluting materials of that grade, one could successfully draw more than 10 Heaven-level FLU. No sect could afford to waste them. Li Mu had only seen a few Heaven-ranked Fulu talismans. Talisman books would not have this kind of high-level Fulu. This was the core secret of the Fulu school, but he had a golden armor talisman in his hand. Previously, Li Mu had wholeheartedly wanted to win the trial, so he didn't have any distracting thoughts. But now that he thought about it, the complexity of the golden armor divine army seal couldn't be compared to the one he had just drawn. In front of the Fulu he drew, the golden armor talisman was like a little brother. When Li Mu thought about the strange phenomenon in the sky, 2 words appeared in his mind: heavenly tribulation. The power of a saint-level Fulu was so strong that the heavens and earth believed that such a Fulu should not exist in this world. Therefore, when the talisman was completed, the heavenly Tao would send down a lightning tribulation. If the person who wrote the talisman could withstand it, the tribulation clouds would disperse. If the person who wrote the talisman could not withstand it, the talisman would be destroyed and the person would die. Even a heavenly tribulation had appeared. Those old foxes in the Fu Lu school must have asked him to draw a saint-level Fu Lu. In other words, he had been taken advantage of by the Fu Lu school. Li Mu's face was as dark as water. He had only wanted to obtain a talisman fairly, but the Fu Lu school had schemed against him. No one knew how he had survived the past 3 days. He had been extremely nervous and exhausted. 3 days of hard work had gone to someone else's disciple. This matter was not over between him and the Fu Lu school. Without 5 saint-level Fu Lu talismans, this matter would not be resolved. If they didn't give him the talismans, he would immediately call the Empress and complain. If the Fu Lu school could recruit a disciple from the Great Zhou in the future, Li Mu would take their head teacher's surname. Outside the law bell, the head teacher and the other heads acted at the same time. In the blink of an eye, the thunderclouds in the sky dissipated completely. The sky above White Cloud Mountain returned to normal. When the strange phenomenon disappeared, the disciples and trial takers heaved a sigh of relief. They wondered what was going on with that rare phenomenon. The person who had obtained first place in the trial had just succeeded in writing a talisman, and such a phenomenon had appeared above everyone's heads. Could it be that this phenomenon had something to do with him? On the main peak, the disciples looked up at the image above their heads, but they realized that it had disappeared. Below the stone steps, the trial takers looked up and realized that the figure on the stone steps had also disappeared. In the Tao Palace on the main peak, Li Mu's figure flashed out. At this moment, he was mentally exhausted and his dermic powers were depleted. He could not even stand properly. A figure supported him in time. The person supporting him was Hyun Jinko, the 5th peak's head teacher. Li Mu's Qingxian sword was given to Lu Hanyan by him. Beside Hyun Jinko, there were 4 other heads. Li Mu knew 2 of them, and he did not know the other 2. The Fu Lu school's head teacher, whom Li Mu had met before, was also there. At this moment, they were all looking at Li Mu with fervent gazes. If it were in the past, Li Mu might have been a little polite to them. After knowing that he had been made a fool of, Li Mu naturally did not have a good expression. He stretched out his hand and said, "Give me the token." He had endured until now for the sake of that talisman. When he got the token, he would settle another score with them. The head teacher of the Fu Lu school smiled and said, "Even without the token, you can join the ancestral court at any time and become a core disciple." The token was not for him to use. Li Mu had no desire to join the Fu Lu school. He did not withdraw his hand and repeated, "Give me the token." The Fu Lu school's head teacher calculated with his fingers and revealed a look of understanding. He said, "So it's not for yourself. Since he's your friend, you can let him come to Mount Baiyun. There's no need for trials. He can directly enter the sect and enjoy the treatment of a core disciple." Li Mu looked at the Fu Lu school's head teacher. The dermic powers in his body began to run amok. Why did he work so hard? Was it not for that token? Now, he was told not to use the token. Where was the Fu Lu school's bottom line? Where were their principles? Puffed. Li Mu spat out another mouthful of blood. He felt the world spinning. His vision turned black and he lost consciousness. Hyun Jinko hurriedly supported him. After using his dermic powers to check, he said, "His mind is severely overdrawn. He needs to rest well." The Fu Lu school's head teacher held Li Mu's wrist and passed over a strand of dermic powers. He said, "Let him rest well first. We'll talk about other things after he wakes up." Although the Fu Lu school's talisman Dao trial was a few days later than the previous years, it had finally ended. More than 6,000 people participated in the trial. In the end, only 52 people obtained the opportunity to become a disciple of the Fu Lu school. Those who passed the 4 trials would stay on Mount Baiyun. The rest would return to where they came from. The younger ones among them would have the opportunity to participate in the next trial. Those who were 26 years old and above would have no chance of becoming a disciple of the Fu Lu school in their lifetime. When the trial ended, the strange phenomenon that occurred on Mount Baiyun became a mystery in everyone's hearts. At the entrance of the Taoist palace on the main peak, Elder Su paced back and forth with a hesitant expression. He had been pacing back and forth for a long time. "Come in." Not long after, The head teacher's voice came from within the Taoist palace. Elder Su could only stride in. He opened his mouth several times, but he stopped himself. He was conflicted about an extremely important matter. If Li Mu did not pass the trial, then he would just treat what he said last time as a joke. What about becoming a core disciple first, then an elder, then a head teacher, and finally the head teacher? Elder Su used to think that what he said was a joke. But now, he had successfully taken the first step. If he obtained first place in the trial, he would become a core disciple of the Fulu school. And the commotion above his head just now was most likely caused by him. Things seemed to be getting a little serious. He thought for a long time before raising his head to look at the Fulu school's head teacher. He said, "Head teacher, this disciple has an important matter to report." The Fulu school's head teacher listened to him and only smiled. He said, "I understand." Elder Su was somewhat stunned. He could not understand the head teacher's reaction. Ever since the establishment of the Fulu school, it had not participated in the worldly affairs of the imperial court. Although it cooperated with the imperial court, it also kept its distance. The imperial court coveted the Fulu school. This matter was not a small matter for the Fulu school. However, since the head teacher did not say anything, he could not say more. At this moment, the Fulu school's head teacher spoke again. "Send the second place of this trial here." This trial of talismans was the strangest one that Elder Su had ever seen in his life. Not to mention that rare phenomenon, no one had ever reached the 50th step in the past trials. This time, 2 people had appeared. Could it be that the heavens were foretelling that the Fulu school was about to prosper? Elder Su quickly sent the person to the Taoist palace on the main peak. The Fulu school's head teacher said, "Elder Su, you may leave." Elder Su looked at the young man with a puzzled expression, but he still left without a word. The young man stood in the Taoist palace and looked straight at the Fulu school's head teacher. The Fulu school's head teacher cupped his hands and said, "It's been 20 years since we last met, Uncle Master Fu Darozi. How have you been?" The young man's figure changed, and he turned from a young man in his 20s to an old man. The old man's hair and beard were all white, and his face was full of wrinkles. His body exuded a strong aura of lethargy. He looked at the Fulu school's head teacher and said indifferently, "Xian Jizi, you haven't improved in 20 years. White Cloud Peak. Li Mu woke up in bed and saw Xiaobai and Wan Wan sitting on his left and right side of the bed, worried. "Young master. Benefactor is awake." Seeing that Li Mu had woken up, smiles immediately appeared on their faces. Before Li Mu could say anything to them, he felt the spirit snail vibrate. The Empress was contacting him. Li Mu said to the 2 girls, "I'm a little hungry. Is there anything to eat at home?" Xiaobai immediately said, "Benefactor, what do you want to eat?" "I'll make it for you," Li Mu said. "Just make some porridge." Xiaobai and Wan Wan ran out to cook. Li Mu picked up the spirit snail and injected some magic power into it. In that strange space, they couldn't send messages. Before that, the 2 of them would talk for a while almost every day. Li Mu had lost contact for 3 days. During these 3 days, the Empress couldn't contact him. "In these 3 days, I've contacted you 127 times." Apart from this sentence, there was no other sound from the spirit snail. The Empress was obviously waiting for Li Mu to explain. Li Mu didn't speak. He just coughed a few times, and his voice was weak. On the other side of the spirit snail, a nervous voice with a hint of anger immediately came. "You're injured." "Who hurt you?" Li Mu said weakly, "It's just a small injury. It's not a big deal." "I'm sorry to have worried your majesty." He briefly told her about the Fulu trial. The other side of the spirit snail was silent for a moment before a voice came. "If you encounter such things in the future, don't try to be brave," Li Mu said. "If you don't reach that level, you won't be able to become number 1 in the trial and get that talisman." Zoe took a deep breath and said, "Remember, I don't need the Fulu school's support, and I don't want you to take risks for it." Li Mu held the spirit snail and said seriously, "For your majesty, it's nothing for me to take a little risk." Chapter 335. If he disappeared for 3 days for no reason and missed more than 100 calls from his boss, the consequences would be very serious. Unless he was not doing it for personal reasons but to get investments for his company. If he could tie Flu school to his and the Empress's war chariot, then even if the old and new parties joined forces, they could only be evenly matched with her. After chatting with the Empress for a while and coaxing her, Li Mu put away the conch. His body was still a little weak, and he did not know how long it would take for him to fully recover. Sitting on the bed, the more he thought about it, the more he felt that F. Lu school was inhumane. The Saint-level Fu Lu consumed a lot of mental energy. Even the F. Lu school's headmaster would not be able to draw it. A few 6th and 7th realms actually tricked a 4th realm rookie like him into wasting his mental energy to work for them. Was this something a human would do? Li Mu could not take this lying down no matter what. Soon, Xiaobai finished cooking the porridge and made a few side dishes with Wan Wan. She brought them to the bedside and fed Li Mu spoonful by spoonful. At the same time, in the Taoist palace on the main peak, the F. Lu school's headmaster and several heads of the sect stared unblinkingly at a Fu Lu floating in the air. Spiritual power flowed in this Fu Lu, and it seemed to have a strange power. Even the surrounding heaven and earth became illusory. This aura, it really is saint-level. How many years has it been since a saint-level Fu Lu appeared in the ancestral court? Unbelievable, this is unbelievable. He's only at the 4th realm. If he's already like this at the 4th realm, when he grows up in the future, as long as he has enough materials, won't he be able to mass-produce saint-level or even god-level cultivators? We must keep him in F. Lu school. He is the hope of our sect's prosperity. The few of them looked at the saint-rank talisman amulet with burning gazes. The significance of a saint-rank talisman amulet to the talisman amulet sect was too great. If the saint-level Fu Lu could be mass-produced, the structure of the 6 Taoist sects might be completely changed. Master Ashenpine revealed a pondering expression and said, I still can't figure out how he could draw a Fu Lu. Could it be that he was once a powerhouse in the upper realm and his current body was just a body he possessed? Hyun Jinko shook his head and said, if it was a body possession, how could it hide from the Supreme Leader and the Empress of the Great Zhou? Master Ashenpine said, but this matter is too inconceivable. It's even inexplicable. Hyun Jinko looked at him and asked, Junior brother, do you remember that there is a special constitution in this world? Master Ashenpine thought for a moment and said in surprise, Senior brother, you mean that he possesses the rare heart of 7 orifices? In this world, most people were ordinary people, but there was no lack of talented people. For example, pure yin, pure yang, 5 elements body, and other special constitutions. If they chose the right cultivation direction, one day of cultivation would be equivalent to several days of cultivation for others. There were also natural spiritual eyes that could control fire and water. Although their cultivation speed might not be very fast, they were born with magical powers. After stepping into the path of cultivation, their strength would far surpass their peers. The heart of 7 orifices was one of the special constitutions. This kind of constitution could not increase the speed of cultivation, nor did it have magical powers. However, if they stepped into the path of cultivation, they would have an advantage that no other special constitutions had. They would not have inner demons. Not only would they not have inner demons, but any illusion, soul control, or soul-searching techniques would be useless against them. This was because their heart of 7 orifices was exquisite. They could maintain their inner calmness at any time and would not be disturbed by external matters. This was a trait that even upper realm cultivators envied. Cultivating the Tao was easy, but cultivating the heart was difficult. Inner demons did not care about the cultivation level of the cultivator, whether it was soul refining or transcending. Even transcending cultivators could not completely rid themselves of the inner demons. For cultivators with profound cultivation, the reason why they failed in writing talismans was not because they could not remember the runes, nor was it because they did not have enough magical power. It was because they could not calm their heart. They could calm their heart for a moment, but writing heaven rank or saint rank Fu Lu would take too long. It was difficult to maintain a calm heart for a long time. However, for those with the heart of 7 orifices, this worry did not exist. Others used their mind to control their heart, but he used his heart to control his mind and body. The heart of 7 orifices was the special constitution that all talisman writers desired the most. It was a pity that the quarter-hour physique was too rare. They had only heard of it in rumors. After thinking about it, they could basically confirm that Li Mu was an extremely rare person who possessed the heart of 7 orifices. Otherwise, it would be hard to explain why he could draw a saint-rank Fu Lu with only a 4th realm cultivation and the help of the sect master. This ability was a gift from the heavens, and it was something that anyone could only be envious of. He has the pure yang physique and the heart of 7 orifices at the same time. Could he be the son of destiny? He is really blessed by the heavens. Not only does he have the pure young physique, but the heart of 7 orifices is even rarer. They sighed. Master Ashenpine suddenly asked, why did Martial Uncle Fu Daozi suddenly return after leaving the sect for 20 years? Hyun Jinko shook his head and said, Martial Uncle passed the position of sect master to senior brother and not him. Martial Uncle Fu Daozi left the sect in anger. This time, he returned to the sect and used his incarnation to disturb the Talisman Dao trial. If it was not for Li Mu, this matter would not have ended. I'm afraid he came with ill intentions. Master Ashenpine seemed to have thought of something and suddenly said, where is Martial Uncle Fu Daozi? They looked at each other and exclaimed in unison, oh no! White Cloud Peak, the small residence. As an injured person, Li Mu was enjoying the feeding service of Xiao Bai and Wan Wan when he suddenly felt a wave of exhaustion. When he realized that something was wrong and recited the heart-calming technique, Wan Wan and Xiao Bai had already collapsed. At the same time, an old man had appeared in his room. The old man's hair and beard were completely white while his face was densely covered in wrinkles. He looked extremely aged and seemed as if he would step into the coffin at any moment. When he saw Li Mu was still conscious, the old man revealed a delighted expression and said, it really is the heart of 7 orifices. This old man gave Li Mu a very familiar feeling. After checking Xiao Bai and Wan Wan and discovering that they were only unconscious, Li Mu asked sternly, who are you? The old man looked at Li Mu with burning eyes and said, I am Fu Daozi, the supreme elder of Fulu School. The current head of Fulu School, Xian Jizi, has to call me Martial Uncle when you see me. Little fellow, are you willing to take me as your master? Li Mu looked into the old man's eyes and finally knew why he felt this old man was so familiar. Wasn't he the young man who had almost defeated him in the Talisman Dao trial? Li Mu was stunned. He looked at him and asked, you are the supreme elder of Fulu School and a transcendent expert? Fu Daozi coughed and said awkwardly, I am Dong Xian, but I am only 1 step away from transcendent. Only 1 step away from transcendent. The meaning of this sentence was very subtle. The Taoist priest that Li Mu knew was also 1 step away from transcendent. Vice Principal Huang of 100 Rivers Academy was said to have 1 foot in transcendent. But his other foot might not be able to step into transcendent even if he died. If he wasn't transcendent, then he should forget about taking him as his master. Li Mu's cultivation was guided by the Empress. Even if he was transcendent, Li Mu wouldn't agree, let alone if he wasn't transcendent. He wouldn't even consider it. Li Mu shook his head and said, I don't want to. Fu Daozi was stunned and asked, why? Li Mu asked in return, what can you teach me? Fu Daozi said, I have traveled for many years and know countless divine arts. Li Mu shook his head and said, someone taught me divine arts and divine arts. Fu Daozi frowned and said, who is it? Is he stronger than me, or is he more knowledgeable than me? Li Mu said, the Empress of Great Zhou. Ahem, ahem. Fu Daozi couldn't catch his breath and coughed a few times. He couldn't compare to the Empress of Great Zhou. She had the Emperor's qi and her cultivation was transcendent. She relied on the Great Zhou court. Among the 4 sects and 6 schools, who could be more knowledgeable than the royal family? Fu Daozi thought for a moment and said, no one in Fulu School can compare to me in Talisman Dao cultivation. Li Mu asked, can you draw a saint-level Fulu? Fu Daozi, I can. Li Mu looked at him and continued, I don't need anyone to teach me the Dao of Fulu. Fu Daozi thought for a moment and suddenly walked forward. He grabbed Li Mu's shoulder and rushed out of the room. He flew out of Baiyun Peak and was about to fly out of the mountain. At the critical moment, Li Mu whistled. Under the support of his dermic powers, the whistle spread far and wide. Buzz! Suddenly, a buzzing sound came from the main peak. A golden light flew over and slammed into Fu Daozi. Fu Daozi's expression changed, and he hurriedly threw Li Mu aside. A golden rune appeared in each of his palms and faced the golden light. The Dao bell ignored Fu Daozi and directly enlarged. It changed direction in the air and covered Li Mu. At the same time, several auras soared into the sky from the main peak. Several figures surrounded Fu Daozi. Fu Daozi's face was gloomy as he asked, Xian Jizi, are you going to go against me again today? Xian Jizi looked at Fu Daozi and shook his head. His identity is special. I can't let Uncle Master take him away today. Fu Daozi said coldly, What special identity? Didn't all of you take a fancy to his heart of 7 orifices and want to keep him in Fulu school? Xian Jizi said, didn't Uncle Master take a fancy to that too? Fu Daozi didn't say anything. He just looked at Xian Jizi and the other peak masters with a complicated gaze. After a while, he looked at everyone and shook his head. It's been 20 years since we last met. All of you have become sect masters and peak masters, he said in a self-deprecating manner, and his body exuded a strong sense of lethargy. Hyun Jinko and the others had complicated gazes. The senior of the sect that they once respected greatly, and was like the sun in the midday sky, was now unavoidable. Fu Daozi looked at Xian Jizi again and said, I only have less than half a year left in my lifespan. Let me take this kid away. I can't leave my legacy without a successor. Xian Jizi didn't say anything. A Fulu floated out of his sleeve and flew towards Fu Daozi. Looking at the talisman, Li Mu's face revealed a bitter expression. For the sake of this talisman, he had nearly worked himself to death in the past 3 days. Fu Daozi looked at the Fulu and his expression changed drastically. He exclaimed, Heavenly Secret Talisman. This talisman was called the Heavenly Secret Talisman, and its function was to conceal the secrets of the heavens. This saint-grade Heavenly Secret Talisman could help him conceal the secrets of the heavens. It could at least increase his lifespan by 10 years. Xian Jizi looked at Fu Daozi and said with a smile, This young friend is a subordinate of Her Majesty the Empress of the Great Zhou. If Martial Uncle wants to accept a disciple, you have to ask for his opinion. If he agrees, we won't stop you. If he doesn't agree, Martial Uncle will bring disaster to you by taking him away. After that, he looked at Li Mu and asked, Young friend, are you willing to be Martial Uncle Fu Daozi's disciple? Li Mu waved his hand and said, We'll talk about this later. First, return the talisman that you owe me. Xian Jizi flipped his hand and a jade talisman appeared in his palm. It slowly flew towards Li Mu. Li Mu took the jade talisman. It was unusually warm in his hand. There was a flowing golden rune in the jade talisman. Although he didn't recognize the Fulu school's talisman, he thought that the head of a sect wouldn't lie to him. After accepting the talisman, Li Mu's face darkened. He said, I'm afraid your sect has to give me and Her Majesty an explanation for using me, right? Li Mu originally wanted that saint-grade talisman amulet, but it was of great use to Talisman Daozi. In any case, Talisman Daozi was still young and had nothing but a long life, so Li Mu took it as pity on the old man. However, Li Mu didn't intend to let Xian Jizi and the others off so easily. Xian Jizi knew what Li Mu was talking about. He asked, What explanation do you want, Lord Li? Since Li Mu called himself this official, Xian Jizi called him Lord Li. At this moment, the conversation between the two was between the Fulu school and the Great Zhou court. Li Mu was waiting for him to say this. He said, 5 saint-level Fulu. Xian Jizi nodded and said, Okay. Li Mu was stunned for a moment. When he came back to his senses, he regretted it. He felt that he had suffered a loss. He asked for 5 saint-level Fulu, but Xian Jizi actually agreed without hesitation. If he had known, he would have asked for 10. He still hadn't seen the world. His vision was too small, however, since he had said it, Li Mu couldn't go back on his words. Otherwise, not only would he lose face, but also the Empress's. He could be shameless, but the Empress's dignity had to be protected at all times. Fu Daozi held the saint-level Fulu with a complicated look in his eyes. Xian Jizi looked at him and said, Welcome back, Martial Uncle. Hyun Jinko and the others also cupped their fists and bowed. They said, Welcome back, Martial Uncle. Li Mu didn't want to get involved in the affairs of the Fulu school. He took the Dao Bell and flew to Baiyun Peak. He saw Wan Wan and Xiao Bai looking anxious. Beside them was a figure that Li Mu had missed for a long time. Young master. Benefactor. Li Mu flew to the courtyard and patted the heads of the 2 little girls. He said, Don't worry, I'm fine. Then he pulled Lu Hanyan into his arms and said, If you didn't come out of seclusion, I would have to return to the divine capital. Lu Hanyan said with a red face, I counted the days and thought that you should be here. Master said that I was restless these 2 days and that seclusion was useless, so he let me out. After she said that, she thought of something and held Li Mu's hand. She asked, I heard from Wan Wan and Xiao Bai that you participated in the Talisman Dao trial. Didn't you say that you didn't want to become a disciple of the Fulu school? Li Mu was stunned for a moment. Then he hugged her tightly again and said, "Because I want to be in the same sect as you." Chapter 336. Participating in the Talisman Dao trial was killing 3 birds with 1 stone. They could get the talisman and give Li Qing a chance to return to the Fulu school in the future. They could also become fellow disciples with Lu Hanyan and have a closer relationship. They could also take the opportunity to infiltrate the Fulu school and become the Empress's spy in the Fulu school. The 3 of them could answer to anyone. It was the best of 3, killing 3 birds with 1 stone. Lu Hanyan was touched and snuggled in Li Mu's arms. The 2 of them were affectionate for a while. While Lu Hanyan was bathing, Li Mu went to the main peak of Baiyun Mountain. He still had not settled the score with the Fulu school's head teacher. He had no choice but to join the Fulu school. Otherwise, he would be exposed in front of the Empress and Lu Hanyan. Of these 2 women, one could make him unable to attend court, and the other could make him unable to sleep. He could not afford to offend either of them. However, he still had great use for the talisman in the future, so he could not use it on himself. Fortunately, the Fulu school's head teacher said that he could join the sect without the talisman. It should not be a polite remark. However, before joining the sect, Li Mu had to settle the score first. When he became a disciple of the Fulu school, he would be family with them. This score was not easy to settle. Baiyun Mountain, Taoist Palace on the main peak. The Fulu school's head teacher, Jizi, looked at Li Mu and asked, "Young friend, your mind is injured. Why don't you recuperate on Baiyun Mountain?" Li Mu cussed in his heart. How shameless. How could they not know why his mind was injured? If they did not use him, how could his mind be injured? Li Mu looked at him and said calmly, "I'm here to get my 5 heaven-grade Fulu." Jizi said, "There are only a few heaven-grade Fulu in the ancestral court every year, and they are all given to core disciples. I don't have any now." Li Mu's face darkened as he asked, "You lied to me?" Jizi smiled and said, "When your mind recovers, I can ask the peak masters to help you draw 5 of them. The materials used for the talismans will be provided by the ancestral court." Li Mu looked at Jizi in a daze. He couldn't imagine that someone like him who looked like an immortal could actually smile and say such shameless words. It was one thing to use him, but to compensate him for his Fulu, he had to draw it himself. Was this something a sect leader would do? Li Mu took a deep breath and swallowed his anger. After all, his wife was still in Fulu school, and he would need their help in the future. As long as he had the materials, it was fine for him to draw it himself. Sooner or later, he would get his revenge somewhere else. Today, he blackmailed him for 5 Fulu, and tomorrow, Li Mu would kidnap his family's Zhong. At this time, Jizi said, "According to the past practice, the disciples recruited by the Talisman Dao trial can only become the 4th-generation disciples. If you enter the Fulu school, I can make an exception and let you become a disciple of a peak master." As soon as he finished speaking, a figure walked into the Dao Palace. Li Mu looked back and found that the person was Fu Daozi, who was called Uncle Master by Jizi and the others. Talisman Daozi walked up to Li Mu and passed a jade slip to him. He said, "Even though you're unwilling to take me as your master, you've given me 10 more years of lifespan. I'll give you my lifetime's comprehension of the Talisman Dao. I hope you'll be able to bring my Talisman Dao to greater heights." Jizi looked at the old man and said, "There are many talented disciples in the ancestral court. If Uncle Master is willing, you can choose one of them to inherit your mantle." Taoist Talisman revealed a proud expression as he said, "They aren't worthy of inheriting my mantle." Jizi shook his head but didn't say anything. Although this Uncle Master's attainments in the Talisman Dao were extraordinary, he had a strange temper. Otherwise, he wouldn't have left the Fulu school 20 years ago. He could only give him advice on this matter and couldn't make the decision for him. Li Mu stood in the Dao Palace and thought quickly. He definitely had to join the Fulu school. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to explain it to the Empress and Lu Hanyan. Jizi just said that he could choose a peak master. In this way, he would become a 3rd-generation disciple like Lu Hanyan. The sect master and the peak masters were all 2nd-generation disciples. Li Mu had been unhappy with them for a long time and didn't want to be inferior to them after joining the sect. If he became Fu Daozi's disciple, he would be a 2nd-generation disciple and be in the same generation as the sect master and the peak masters. He would also be able to take charge of the Fu Lu school in the second half of the plan. Now that he had the status, the only thing he lacked was his cultivation. When his cultivation improved, he could draw Fu Lu at will and bring glory to the Fu Lu school. At that time, how could Xian Jizi still have the face to occupy the position of the sect master? Thinking of this, Li Mu suddenly looked at Fu Daozi and said, "I'm willing to be your disciple." Xian Jizi was stunned. Fu Daozi was stunned for a moment before he looked at Li Mu in surprise and asked, "What did you say?" Li Mu cupped his fists and bowed to him. He repeated, "I'm willing to be your disciple." Fu Daozi grabbed his hand and said excitedly, "Good, good, good. I didn't expect that I would be able to take in a disciple with the heart of 7 orifices before I die. Don't worry, before I die, I will teach you all my talisman Dao comprehension." Li Mu didn't know what the heart of 7 orifices was, but since Fu Daozi had the first impression and explained it for him, he didn't even have to make up a reason. Originally, he was slightly resistant to taking a stranger as his master. But at this moment, when he saw an old man with 1 foot in the grave, who was so excited that his eyes were filled with tears and his white beard was trembling, for some reason, that trace of resistance quickly disappeared. Li Mu said with a smile, "When my mind recovers, I will draw a few more heavenly secret talismans for you." Fu Daozi said with a gratified expression, "The heavenly secret talisman can only conceal the heavenly secret once. After 10 years, if I can't advance to the transcendence realm, it will be the day of my death. However, I have no regrets to take in such a disciple. So what if those old fellows have a higher cultivation than me? Can their disciples be as powerful as my disciples?" A moment later, in a Dao palace behind the main peak, Li Mu knelt on the ground and bowed respectfully to Fu Daozi 3 times. He said, "Greetings, Master." The Grand Elder's disciple recruitment was supposed to be a grand ceremony. 3 months in advance, all the disciples of the Talisman Puppet Sect's ancestral court and the sect masters of the subsects were supposed to come from all over to congratulate him. As soon as Xian Jizi proposed it, Li Mu and Fu Daozi rejected it at the same time. Li Mu didn't want to be high profile, but Fu Daozi obviously had other reasons. Fu Daozi personally helped Li Mu up and said, 20 years ago, I was dissatisfied with senior brother passing the position of sect master to Xian Jizi, so I left Mount Baiyun in anger. This time, I returned to the mountain only to find a disciple to pass on my talisman Dao before the end of my life. As for other miscellaneous matters, it's better to avoid them." Li Mu could feel the lethargy in his body and the unwillingness in his tone. He could only say, "There are still 10 years. Perhaps in these 10 years, Master can find a way to transcend." Fu Daozi shook his head and said, "If I could find it, I would have found it long ago. You don't have to feel sorry for me. I have experienced everything in my life. If I can find a disciple who can pass on my talisman Dao before the end of my life, I will die without regrets. At that time, you can find a mountain on Mount Baiyun and bury me. Every year, you can come to burn an incense stick, so that we won't be in vain." He was disappointed for a while, but then he became excited again. He looked at Li Mu with shining eyes and said, "There are still 10 years. You can do a lot of things in 10 years. You have the heart of 7 orifices, so you can definitely pass on my talisman Dao. Unfortunately, it's difficult for you to break through to the transcendence realm in 10 years. Otherwise, I can see with my own eyes that you become the sect master of Fu Lu School." Li Mu was stunned for a moment and said uncertainly, "Sect? Sect master?" Fu Daozi sneered and said, "When you break through to the transcendence realm, as long as you have the materials, you can have as many saint-level Fu Lu as you want. At that time, Fu Lu School will rely on you to develop. Xian Jizi won't have the face to hold on to the position of sect master. He stole my position, so I will let my disciple steal his position." After Li Mu came back to his senses, he looked at Fu Daozi and said firmly, "Don't worry, Master. I will work hard to improve my cultivation and avenge you." "Good disciple." Fu Daozi laughed and said, "Let's go. Let's get to know your senior brothers and sisters again. It's a pity that those 2 old guys are not here. They have more good things." Li Mu soon understood what get to know them again meant. He touched the flask heaven ring on his finger and thought, "Sooner or later, I will have to change to a bigger space ring." On Jade Emperor Peak, Master Vang Yang took out a Fu Lu with extreme heartache and passed it to Li Mu. He said, "This is senior brother's gift for our first meeting. Junior brother, you must accept it." On Azure Profound Peak, Hyun Jinko had an embarrassed expression as he looked at Fu Daozi and said, Martial uncle, I don't have anything good in my possession right now. Can I? Fu Daozi frowned and said, Where's your azure profound sword? Hyun Jinko sighed and said, I gave it to junior brother Li's Dao companion last time. On Songling Peak, Master Ashenpine passed a stack of Fu Lu to Li Mu and said, Senior brother doesn't have any heaven rank Fu Lu, but these are high-grade earth rank Fu Lu. Junior brother, please accept them. On White Cloud Peak. Fu Daozi listened to the report of an elder and said, What? Yuzhen is in closed-door cultivation? Where is she? I'll go wake her up. Li Mu hurriedly stopped him. Master, forget it, forget it. It's not too late to wait for her to come out. 2 hours later, Li Mu landed on White Cloud Peak again. He touched the ring on his hand once again. Other than Yuzhen, who had yet to come out of closed-door cultivation, all the first seats, including the sect master, had been severely blackmailed. If it wasn't for Li Mu stopping him, Fu Daozi might have forcefully called Yuzhen out of closed-door cultivation. Lu Hanyan had already finished bathing. She walked to Li Mu's side and asked, Have you joined a sect? Li Mu nodded. Lu Hanyan looked up at him and asked rather proudly, Then are you going to call me martial uncle in the future? Li Mu shook his head. He was now a second-generation disciple of the Fu Lu school and was of the same generation as the Fu Lu school's sect master, her master Yuzhen, and the first seats of the peak. Lu Hanyan was slightly stunned and then said, Could it be that you've also become the disciple of a first seat of a peak? Li Mu continued to shake his head. Lu Hanyan thought for a moment and muttered, Could it be that your master is the sect master? Even if that's the case, you still have to call me senior sister. Li Mu knocked her head lightly and looked at her with a smile. Martial niece Lu, don't be rude to your martial uncle. Chapter 337. Martial niece, I'll give in to you. Yu Hanyan pinched Li Mu's waist and said through gritted teeth, You're not allowed to get on my bed tonight. Being a second-generation disciple of the Fugu school, the same generation as the head of the sect, was something to be proud of. But Li Mu obviously showed off to the wrong person. It was late at night. He lay alone on the bed in the wing room, staring at the roof in a daze. There were always many unpredictable things in life. Before coming to Mount Baiyun, Li Mu didn't expect that he would participate in the trial of Talisman Taoism, become the disciple of the Grand Elder, and shoulder the heavy responsibility of becoming the next head of the sect. Whether it was for the Empress or for Talisman Daozi's last wish, he inexplicably had another great goal. Late at night, Li Mu took out the jade slip given to him by Talisman Daozi and put it on his forehead. In this jade slip, there were more than 100 years of Talisman Daozi's comprehension of Talisman Taoism. Compared with these powerhouses who had been immersed in Talisman Taoism for decades or even hundreds of years, Li Mu didn't even know a little about Talisman Taoism. He only knew how to draw talismans, but he didn't know anything about talismans. This jade slip undoubtedly opened the door to a new world for Li Mu. It let Li Mu know that Talisman Taoism could be used in this way. Talisman Daozi was a once-in-a-century genius of Talisman Taoism, but his talent in cultivation was not particularly outstanding. So far, he had not taken the key step. Even though with his attainments in Talisman Taoism, he could fight against a transcendent realm master with his cultivation in Dongxian, but he was still not a transcendent realm master. Under the transcendent realm, the lifespan of cultivators was not much longer than that of humans. Because of cultivation and health preservation, cultivators in Dongxian could live for more than 60 years, which was equivalent to the oldest among mortals. If there were no accidents, cultivators in the divine power realm and the creation realm could live for more than 100 years. The reason why cultivators seemed to live longer was that they were free from disease and disaster, and they knew how to cultivate and maintain their health. Therefore, they could easily live for decades or even hundreds of years. Mortals lived for decades. If they paid attention to their health, their lifespan might not be shorter than cultivators. Talisman Daozi had already lived for 2 cycles of 60 years, and his life was about to end. Even though the heavenly secret talisman could buy him 10 years of time, he would still perish if he couldn't advance within these 10 years. The jade slip contained all his comprehensions of the Tao of talismans. Li Mu could sense the expectations that Talisman Daozi had for him. He truly regarded Li Mu as his personal disciple. Li Mu and the Empress were actually the same type of people. Because of loneliness, if anyone treated them well, they would return the favor tenfold. Li Mu wanted to help Fu Daozi, but unfortunately, he was powerless to do so. He let out a long sigh. Suddenly, the door was opened from the outside. Yu Hanyan walked to the bedside and said angrily, "Why don't you come over?" Li Mu put away his thoughts and said sadly, "Weren't you the one who didn't let me go over?" Yu Hanyan glared at him and said, "You don't go over just because I don't let you. When did you listen to me?" Li Mu knew that her self-control was worse than his. She would definitely lose it before him. At this time, he couldn't be stubborn anymore. He pulled her into his arms and said, Okay, it was my fault during the day. In the future, we'll talk about our own matters. Anyway, we won't stay on Mount Baiyun for long. By the way, your cultivation is already at the Divine Power Realm. Do you want to go back to the Divine Capital with me?" Yu Hanyan sighed and said, "I want to, but my cultivation is now at a critical moment. If I go into seclusion with Master for a few more months, I'll be able to break through to the 5th realm." Li Mu was shocked and asked, "So soon?" Yu Hanyan said proudly, "I'm now cultivating the pure Yin technique. Every step of my cultivation is guided by Master. Mount Baiyun is full of spiritual energy and there are endless spiritual jades. If I go into seclusion for a few more months then, Li Mu asked, "Then what?" Yu Hanyan lowered her head and said softly, "Then, as long as we really do dual cultivation, I'll be able to borrow your pure Yang energy. When Yin and Yang converge, I'll break through the bottleneck." Li Mu and Yu Hanyan hugged and kissed. They had done most of the things that couples should do. However, there was still one most important thing that they hadn't done. Firstly, the concept of this era was different. That step had to be taken on the night of the wedding. Only then would there be a sense of ceremony. Secondly, when the Yin and Yang converged, it was the best time to break through. If they lost it now, their cultivation would increase a little. However, they would still encounter a bottleneck when the time came. The bottleneck between each realm was the hardest to break through. Being stuck at a bottleneck for decades was nothing new in the cultivation world. There were only a few months left. When he returned to Shandu, Li Mu had to start preparing for the wedding. The attraction between pure Yin and pure Yang was irresistible. The two of them reunited after a short separation. They only came out of the room after lunch the next day. Li Mu's original plan was to accompany her for 3 months. However, her cultivation was at a critical moment. 3 days later, she went into seclusion again. 3 days later, Li Mu came to the main peak of Mount Baiyun again. He still had something important to do. When Yu Hanyan entered the sect, Hyun Jinko gave her a chance to comprehend the Tao page. Although what she comprehended was a copy, she gained a lot. As a second-generation disciple, Li Mu could directly comprehend the original page of the Tao page. In the Tao Palace, Xian Jizi stretched out his hand. A yellowed piece of paper appeared in his palm. There were no words on the paper. It looked simple and unadorned as it floated quietly in Hyun Jinko's palm. Fu Daozi stood beside Li Mu and said seriously, "The Tao page is a page of the Tao scripture. It contains the supreme Tao." The founder of the Fugu school obtained this page. After comprehending it, he left the Fugu school's orthodoxy behind. This is a rare opportunity. Study it well. It will be of great benefit to your future cultivation. Xianjizi looked at Li Mu and said, "This page of the Tao scripture contains the talisman's Tao. Different people will comprehend different things. How much you can comprehend will depend on your luck." Li Mu had a good understanding of the Tao scripture. It was said that most of the supernatural powers, Tao techniques, talisman, pills, and array formations in the current cultivation world originated from the Tao scripture. Anyone who obtained any page of the Tao scripture could establish a sect. That was how the 6 sects of the Tao sect came about. The Tao page slowly floated over from Xianjizi's palm. Li Mu reached out and pressed his hand on it. In the next moment, he entered a white world. Unlike the world he entered when he participated in the trial, this world was a vast expanse of white. Even when Li Mu put his hand in front of his eyes, he could only see white. He was wrapped in a white fog that he could not see clearly. In the fog, there was a flash of golden light from time to time. It was so fast that one could not see it clearly. Li Mu tried to chase after the golden light, but the golden light flashed and disappeared. The more he wanted to see it clearly, the faster the golden light flashed in the white fog. In the end, he could only see a blurry afterimage. This feeling was similar to when Li Mu first drew talismans. The more he wanted to draw it in one go, the more restless his heart was and the greater the possibility of failure. Therefore, Li Mu sat down cross-legged and began to recite the Clear Heart Sutra. In the Dao Palace of the main peak, Xian Jizi looked at Li Mu, who was sitting cross-legged, and said indifferently, "It seems that he has found the trick. I wonder how many talisman he can comprehend in the end." Talisman Daozi asked, "How many did you comprehend back then?" Xian Jizi said, "I'm ashamed. I only comprehended 10. I can't compare to Martial Uncle." Talisman Daozi glanced at him and said, "But your luck isn't bad. The talismans you've comprehended are new talismans that no one else has comprehended. Amongst the 15 talismans I've comprehended, 8 of them were comprehended by others." Xian Jizi looked at Li Mu and said, "I just don't know how lucky junior brother is." In the white fog space, as Li Mu's heart calmed down, he noticed that the white fog in front of him seemed to have faded a little. At the same time, the golden light flashing in the fog slowed down. He could vaguely see that it was a talisman made of runes. However, the talisman was still very fast and he could not see the details clearly. Li Mu was not in a hurry and continued to recite the Clear Heart Sutra. The white fog in front of him became thinner and the speed of the talisman became slower. Gradually, Li Mu could see the details of the talisman. This was a talisman that Li Mu had never seen before. Judging from the complexity of the runes, it should be above the mid-grade of the heaven rank. Li Mu remembered the talisman in his heart and looked further ahead. As the fog gradually faded, Li Mu could gradually see the talisman flashing in the distance. Obviously, as long as his heart was calm, he would be able to see further, more clearly, and more talismans. Li Mu was no longer anxious. He closed his eyes and began to recite the Clear Heart Sutra again and again. After reciting it countless times, Li Mu slowly opened his eyes. The scene in front of him stunned him. The surrounding white fog was gone. He sat cross-legged on the ground and there was an extremely vast land in front of him. On the land, there were many monsters that Li Mu had never seen before. These monsters were hundreds of feet tall and emitted an extremely terrifying aura. They wreaked havoc on the land. Wherever they went, mountains collapsed and rivers flowed in reverse. These ugly but incomparably powerful monsters were slowly walking towards Li Mu. Behind Li Mu, there were countless figures floating in the air. These people stretched out their hands and drew lines in the air. Wherever their fingertips passed, golden light condensed and formed runes. Finally, they converged into a talisman and flew towards these monsters. The golden light that Li Mu had seen just now was the scene of these talisman flying in front of his eyes. It was just that at that time, his eyes were filled with white fog and he could not see where these talisman came from or went. These talisman flew over the heads of these monsters. Some summoned incomparably thick lightning dragons and smashed the monsters into ashes. Some turned into balls of flames and engulfed the monsters. Some froze the monsters and then collapsed. In this place, Li Mu had seen many talisman that he had never seen or heard of before. Many doubts appeared in his mind. What were these huge monsters with terrifying auras? He had read a lot of books and was familiar with the records of monsters in the 10 continents, but he had never seen any description of them. If these things really existed, even if they were not in the ancestral state, there would definitely be records of them. And who were those people behind him wearing strange clothes? Their fighting style was so strange that they could actually draw talismans out of thin air without using talisman materials. Although today's transcendent experts could also draw talismans out of thin air, the power of the talisman was far from being comparable to the ones in this scene. Li Mu had many mysteries in his heart that had not been solved. Just as he was about to look for a while, the previous scene suddenly changed. He returned to the Dao Palace on the main peak again. In front of him were Xian Jizi and Fu Daozi. Fu Daozi looked at Li Mu and asked expectantly, "How many talisman did you see?" "How many?" Li Mu recalled for a moment and recalled the talismans that filled the sky and densely covered the entire sky. He said, "There should be around 1,000. Chapter 338. Qian or 800? Fu Daozi looked at Li Mu in a daze. Even Xian Jizi's expression was full of shock. The Tao page was extremely mysterious. Since ancient times, those who could comprehend several Tao pages from it were already geniuses. Those who could comprehend more than 10 Tao pages were geniuses among geniuses. Those disciples later became famous masters of the Fugu school. They couldn't find a single word to describe it. Li Mu couldn't figure out their expressions and asked, "What's wrong? Is there a problem?" After Fu Daozi came to his senses, he asked again, "How many talisman do you remember?" Li Mu said embarrassedly, "1. In fact, He had only carefully memorized the first talisman. Later, Li Mu was stunned by the scene after the white fog dissipated. The huge monster and the strange human were beyond his knowledge and experience. How could he be in the mood to memorize the talisman? That's impossible. Fu Daozi's face was full of disbelief. Then he asked Li Mu, "What did you see in the Tao page?" Li Mu said, "A continent where powerful monsters wreaked havoc. Some human beings could condense talismans in the void and draw powerful talismans. They used the talisman to attack and seal those monsters." Fu Daozi was stunned. He looked at Xianjizi and asked, "What did you see at the beginning?" Xianjizi said slowly, "White fog." Occasionally, a golden talisman flashed through the white fog. Fu Daozi looked at Li Mu again and said in confusion, "It's strange. All the people who comprehended the Tao page saw fog. Why did you see this?" Li Mu explained. "In the beginning, there was only white fog. However, as one's heart calmed down, the white fog would become thinner. When one's heart calmed down completely, the white fog would completely dissipate. The golden talismans that you saw flashing through the white fog were created by those humans. They used their fingers to draw talismans in the air. Their purpose was to attack some of the monsters in the fog." I knew it. After Fu Daozi finished listening to Li Mu's description, an excited expression appeared on his face, and he said, "During the ancient times, the spirit energy of the heavens and the earth was extremely dense, so writing talismans didn't require the assistance of spirit liquids. Later on, the spirit energy of the heavens and the earth thinned greatly, so the seniors of the Tao sect relied on various spirit objects of the heavens and the earth to liquefy their spirit energy, and use it as materials for writing talismans. This old man's guess is true, it's true." Li Mu said regretfully, "It's a pity that I didn't pay much attention to the talisman just now. If I can comprehend the Tao page again, I should be able to remember it." Xianjizi shook his head. "You can only comprehend the Tao page once. Everyone only has one chance. Even if you touch it again, you won't be able to enter the world just now. However, what you see on the Tao page will be deeply engraved in your memory. As long as you meditate, you'll be able to recall it again." Hearing Xianjizi's words, Li Mu closed his eyes and thought back to the scene he had just seen. Sure enough, the things he had seen on the Tao page appeared once again, and very clearly. Fu Daozi asked expectantly, "Do you remember now?" Li Mu nodded. "Yes." Fu Daozi continued to ask, "What kind of talisman are there?" Li Mu closed his eyes and stretched out his finger. According to the scene in his mind, he drew a few talismans in the void and said, "This talisman can turn an area into a sea of fire. The fire is blue and doesn't seem to be ordinary fire. As long as you touch it, you won't be able to get rid of it." Then he changed to another talisman and continued to speak. "This talisman can summon a lightning dragon. This talisman can freeze an area of 10,000 feet. This talisman can turn the earth into magma. This talisman can summon huge meteorites." After copying dozens of talisman, Li Mu opened his eyes and said, "There are too many talisman. I'm afraid there are more than 1,000 talismans. I can't finish them all in a short time." Fu Daozi looked at Li Mu in shock. After a while, he finally came to his senses and looked at Tianjizi, saying, "You should abdicate." He put one hand on Tianjizi's shoulder and said, "The Fugu school is destined to prosper in the hands of my disciple. If you don't give up the position of the headmaster, you will be hindering the prosperity of our sect. You have to apologize to the ancestors," Li Mu hurriedly said. "Master, forget it. There's no hurry." Fu Daozi didn't insist to the end. Instead, he said happily, "After seeing those talisman, I have comprehended something. I need to cultivate in seclusion for a few days to comprehend it." Fu Daozi left in a hurry. Li Mu stood in the Taoist palace and asked Xianjizi, "What are those monsters?" Xianjizi shook his head and said, "In ancient times, the spiritual qi of heaven and earth was rich and everything flourished. However, there weren't many things that were really passed down from that era. Everything that happened in that era has always been a mystery in the cultivation world." Li Mu asked doubtfully, "The Tao scripture didn't seem to be born that long ago, did it?" Xianjizi explained, "People think that the Tao scripture was compiled by countless Taoist seniors more than 1,000 years ago. But in fact, the Tao scripture has existed for even longer. Perhaps it can be traced back to the ancient times. At that time, the Taoist seniors only passed down the orthodoxy of the various Taoist sects by comprehending the Tao pages. The ancient times were a long time ago for the people of this world. There were few records about the ancient times in this era. For some reason, the inheritance between the two eras was broken. The only thing that could be confirmed was that the spiritual chi of heaven and earth was very rich in the ancient times, which was many times richer than today's. The cultivation of cultivators was related to spiritual chi. The masters of this era all stopped at the transcendence realm. In that era, there should have been cultivators at the 8th or even the 9th realm. Li Mu thought of those monsters. Their strength might be related to the density of spiritual chi. With the thin spiritual chi of heaven and earth, it was difficult for such huge monsters to be born. They might have gone extinct in the long river of time. No one could explain the scene that happened in the Tao page to Li Mu. Li Mu stopped thinking about it and asked Xianjizi, "Is there any way to show the scenes that I saw in the Tao page?" Xianjizi shook his head and said, "You can show ordinary memories with the cultivation strength of the 5th realm. However, you can't show the insights in the Tao page." Li Mu found that he couldn't show the scenes in his mind with spiritual spell visual projection. It seemed that the problem didn't lie with him but with the Tao page. He waved his hand and said, "I'll go back now. Don't forget that you still owe me 5 heaven-level talisman." Standing in the Taoist palace, Xianjizi watched him leave as if he saw the beginning of the change in the cultivation world. White Cloud Peak. Li Mu had been in seclusion cultivation for 7 days after he returned. After 7 days, he opened the door and stood in the courtyard. Under the long-awaited sunlight, he stretched lazily. During these 7 days, he had watched the scenes that he saw in the Tao page countless times. He recorded all the talisman that he could see and organized them into a jade slip. Similar to a USB flash drive, jade slips were used by cultivators to store information. If it was recorded on paper, it would take at least 1,300 pages. If it was recorded on jade slips, 1 jade slip would be enough. Li Mu flew up and came to the main peak again. Then, he landed in a Taoist palace. Talisman Daozi walked out. Li Mu handed him the jade slip and said, "Master, take this." Talisman Daozi took the jade slip and asked, "What's this?" Li Mu said with a smile, "You'll know when you see it." Talisman Daozi pressed the jade slip to his forehead. His expression gradually became sluggish, and even his body trembled slightly. Li Mu looked at him and said, "These are all the talisman images in the Tao page. I hope you can understand the great Tao of the talisman from them, Master." Talisman Daozi looked at Li Mu with his beard trembling. He tried to speak several times but failed. Li Mu bowed and said, "I won't disturb, Master. I'll go back now." He flew out of the Taoist palace and returned to the White Cloud Peak. He let out a long sigh of relief. This was the only thing he could do for Talisman Daozi. Li Mu used the talismans on the Tao page to repay the favor of Talisman Daozi for giving him the comprehension of the Tao of talismans. As for whether Talisman Daozi could comprehend the Tao of transcendence from it, that would depend on himself. Not long after, an aura familiar to Li Mu landed outside the small building. Li Mu opened the door. Elder Su said respectfully, "Uncle Master Li, the sect master invites you in." In less than half a month, he had changed the way he addressed Li Mu from Lord Li to Uncle Master Li. Although Xianjizi listened to Talisman Daozi and didn't publicize this matter in the sect, he still informed the 3rd-generation elders in the sect. Li Mu came to the main peak's Tao palace and found that other than Xianjizi, the other heads were also there. Li Mu cupped his hands and said, "Greetings, sect master, senior brothers and senior sisters." With a master who was a supreme elder, it was much more convenient for him to move around Baiyun Mountain. Even if he met the sect master and the sect master, he only had to greet them as equals. Xianjizi looked at Li Mu and said, "The materials for the talisman are ready. Junior brother, you can start at any time." After this period of rest, Li Mu's injuries had healed and his mind had returned to its peak state. Drawing a saint-level talisman might be a little difficult, but for a heaven-level talisman, it shouldn't be a problem for him to draw 5 of them in one go. Drawing talismans wasn't difficult for him. The difficult thing was to gather the materials. The cultivators in the ancient times could draw talismans in the void because the spiritual chi of heaven and earth was rich at that time. When the spiritual chi was thin, they had to find natural treasures that contained spiritual chi to replace it. Li Mu borrowed Xianjizi's magic power and drew 5 heaven-level talisman in one go. He let out a sigh of relief. At this time, Xianjizi said, "There is still some talisman liquid left. Junior brother, do you want to draw a few more?" Li Mu wiped the sweat from his forehead and said in a bad mood, "Draw? Do you think I'm a tool for drawing talismans?" Xian Jizi sighed and said, "The great competition of the peaks is about to begin. In every competition, the top 3 disciples will be rewarded with a heaven-level talisman. In the ancestral court, except for junior brother, no one has 100% confidence. This talisman liquid is extremely precious. As a member of the Fugu school, junior brother can't bear to waste it, right?" Li Mu looked at the serious face of Xian Jizi and understood that he still had a lot to learn if he wanted to be the sect master of the Fugu school. Chapter 339. Li Mu had originally thought that he had profited greatly by becoming Fu Daozi's disciple and becoming a second-generation disciple of the Fu Lu school for the Empress. Now he realized that these old foxes seemed to be even more scheming. Although there were many people in the Fu Lu school who could draw a heaven-grade Fu Lu, they didn't have a 100% success rate and might cause a waste of precious talisman fluid. In order not to waste materials, they seemed to be planning to use Li Mu as a tool. He had always been the one to use others as tools, so this was how it felt to be used as a tool. However, Li Mu couldn't refuse. Xian Jizi's reason was very sufficient. Li Mu was a disciple of the Talisman sect, so he naturally had the responsibility to save resources for the sect. If Li Mu refused, it would be disloyal to the sect. How could someone who was disloyal to the Fu Lu school become the Fu Lu school's headmaster? Thus, Li Mu was able to draw 3 more heaven-grade Fu Lu. The function of these Fu Lu was to repair the physical body. Even if one's limbs were chopped off, they could be regenerated in an extremely short amount of time. In the underground karst cave, Wu Bo had been ambushed by senior brother Qin and crushed his heart. He had used this talisman to regenerate a new heart. Anyone wouldn't be able to endure 8 times in 2 hours. After Li Mu finished the last stroke, he supported himself on a stone pillar in the Dao Palace and walked to the front of the hall. Then, he collapsed comfortably on a chair. He would rather return to the divine capital and be squeezed dry by the Empress than be squeezed dry by a group of old men here. Li Mu only lacked magic power to draw heaven-grade or even saint-grade Fu Lu. If he had the Empress magic power and enough materials, he could draw as many as he wanted. He had always been taking from the Empress and had never given anything in return. When he returned to the Immortals' capital, he would also draw some Fu Lu for the Empress. Although the Empress was rich, she didn't have a lot of good things on her. For example, the heaven rank Fu Lu was a rare item in the Fu Lu school. In the 10 continents and 3 islands, besides the Fu Lu school, almost no one could draw a Fu Lu of this level. The only one the Empress gave to Li Mu was one that Li Mu gave to Xiao Bai for protection. Other than that, the highest rank Fu Lu she gave to Li Mu was only Earth rank. This was obviously not in line with the status of the Empress of the Great Zhou. She always carried a stack of heavenly rank Fu Lu with her. In the future, when she rewarded her meritorious subjects, she would be able to take it out. The position where Li Mu was lying was the headmaster's position. Fu Lu school had a hierarchy, and his action was against the rules. However, the heads only looked at each other and didn't say anything. They had already heard from the headmaster that he had comprehended all of the pages. The founder of the Fu Lu school only comprehended a portion of the pages, and yet he was able to establish the Fu Lu school. What would happen if he comprehended all of it? At that time, the title of the #1 Taoist sect would change hands. Xian Jizi looked at Li Mu who was lying on the chair and asked, "Junior brother, have you comprehended all of the pages?" Li Mu extended his hand, and a jade slip appeared in his palm. He threw the jade slip to Xian Jizi and said, "The Fu Lu that appeared in the pages are all in here." Nothing ventured. Nothing gained. The future leader had to have the bearing of a future leader. Li Mu was not worried that he would starve to death if he taught others the way of talismans. The stronger the talisman sect was, the more beneficial it would be for him and the Empress. Xian Jizi placed the jade slip on his forehead, and a moment later, he passed it to Hyun Jinko who was beside him. After Hyun Jinko read it, he passed it to Zhangyang Zi. Apart from Yuzhen Zi who was in seclusion, the other 6 heads all looked at the jade slip with longing and excitement in their eyes. They all knew what this jade slip meant. The founder of the Fu Lu school founded, and Li Mu would lead the Fu Lu school to an unprecedented peak. Not to mention that he had completely comprehended the pages and contributed the complete contents of the pages, just by relying on his heart of 7 orifices. If he was tied to the Fu Lu school and drew talismans day and night, in the future, the Fu Lu school's disciples would each have a saint-level attacking Fu Lu. Their attacks would be at the 7th realm, and they would be able to beat the 10 demonic sects together. Unfortunately, they couldn't tie him up. Not to mention that the materials needed for a saint-level Fulu were hard to find, and it was impossible to create an unlimited number of them. Martial Uncle Fu Daozi would also not allow them to do so. Not to mention, he had the Empress of the Great Zhou behind him. He was a treasure in the Fulu school, and in the heart of the Empress, he would also be a treasure. If the Fulu school forcibly detained him, it was very likely that the Great Zhou court would send a large force to suppress them. The strength of the Fulu school was unquestionable, but in the Great Zhou, the strength of any sect could not compare to the Great Zhou court. Xian Jizi put away the jade slip and bowed to Li Mu with cupped fists, saying, "Thank you, junior brother." As the head of the Fulu school, his bow represented the highest etiquette of the Fulu school. He bowed to Li Mu for his contributions to the Fulu school, and for bringing the Fulu school to a new height. Li Mu waved his hand and said, "We're on the same side, there's no need to thank me." Xian Jizi smiled and said, "In that case, senior brother won't be polite. In fact, there's another important matter that concerns the future of the sect, and I need junior brother's help." Seeing Xian Jizi's expression, Li Mu began to regret what he had just said. As the head of the sect, Xian Jizi's face was as thick as his cultivation. Li Mu had become a second-generation disciple of the Fulu school, but he had not obtained any benefits, and had become a tool for them. Now, he actually had something to ask of him. How could he not feel embarrassed? Li Mu did not speak, but Xian Jizi took the initiative to say, "Although the ancestral court holds a trial of the Tao of Talismans every 4 years, the disciples who pass the trial have the aptitude for the Tao of Talismans, but most of them lack the talent for cultivation. Junior brother is a pillar of the Great Zhou, a favored minister of the Empress. Can you borrow the power of the imperial court to help the sect recruit some cultivation geniuses with special constitutions from the common people, and nurture them from a young age?" This head of the sect was really squeezing Li Mu's value in all aspects. Li Mu's face revealed a difficult expression. He said, "Senior brother also knows that the imperial court has its own rules. In principle, the local government is forbidden from revealing the people's birth characters." At this point, his tone changed and he said, "Of course, although I'm an official of the Great Zhou, I'm also a disciple of the Fulu school. I'll definitely think of the sect. After I return to the divine capital, I'll mention this matter to Her Majesty, but I don't know if Her Majesty will agree." Xian Jizi cupped his fists and said, "Senior brother thanks junior brother in advance." Li Mu continued, "The imperial court's attitude towards the various sects is the same, and it's not easy to make an exception. I think that if we can show some sincerity, the possibility of Her Majesty agreeing might be greater." Xian Jizi asked, "What sincerity?" Li Mu looked at him and said leisurely, "Her Majesty has just ascended the throne and is short of manpower. If the ancestral court can cooperate with the imperial court and send some elders to be stationed in the imperial court in the capacity of a consecrator, then make a request, wouldn't it be difficult for Her Majesty to refuse?" Li Mu needed to correct the misconception of the upper echelons of the Fulu school that they always liked to freeload when they encountered problems. Freeloading would not last long. Cooperation was a win-win situation. Only with effort would there be returns. Not everyone was like Li Mu, willing to indulge their bad habits. After thinking for a while, Xian Jizi nodded and said, "This is not difficult." Since the two of them had reached an agreement on this issue, the following matters were much simpler. Li Mu was not only a second-generation disciple of the Fulu school, but also an official of the Great Zhou. It was more than suitable for him to be the middleman. The Empress was already short of manpower, and the internal guards had undergone a wave of purges. If an expert of the Fulu school joined, she would not have to experience the awkwardness of having no one to rely on. He could not wait to tell the Empress this good news. After watching Li Mu walk out of the palace, Xian Jizi thought for a while and said, "I've decided to pass the position of headmaster to junior brother Li." This was originally the most important matter of the Fulu school, and it required everyone to discuss and decide. However, after Xian Jizi spoke, none of the heads objected. Hyun Jinko hesitated for a moment and said, "The current him is not suitable for this position. After all, he's only at the 4th realm. It's not a good thing to push him to the front so early." Xian Jizi shook his head and said, "Of course not now. At the very least, we have to wait until he enters the 7th realm." Hyun Jinko's eyes were filled with anticipation. He said, "I wonder what heights he will bring the Fulu school to, by Yun Peak." Li Mu had just returned to his room. Having learned his lesson from last time, he first cast a soundproof spell, then took out the conch. After activating it with his transcendence energy, he said impatiently, "Your Majesty, let me tell you a piece of good news." Chapter 340. Li Mu wondered if he was born to be busy. Taking advantage of his vacation time, he even facilitated the cooperation between the Fulu school and the court. In the past, although the court had cooperated with the various sects, it was only at a superficial level. For example, the large sects allowed their low-level disciples to be stationed in local government offices to help the local officials govern their areas. The court gave the sects their territories and allowed them to recruit disciples in the vicinity of the power they belonged to, and so on. This kind of cooperation on a deeper level rarely happened in the past. The reason was naturally the distrust between the two sides. The power and strength of these sects were too strong enough to threaten the rule of the court. Moreover, the court had absolute control over the 36 counties in name. The 4 sects and 6 schools' activities in the secular world were greatly restricted. Because of this suspicion and distrust, the Great Zhou court had never had an official from the 4 sects and 6 schools. Even a minor official was required to not have a sect background, and the high-level positions of these sects were not held by officials of the court. Li Mu was probably the first person to hold both a high position in the court and a high level of a sect. With him as the middleman, it was most appropriate. Li Mu did not tell the Empress anything else about the Fulu school. He only said that he intended to facilitate the cooperation between the Fulu school and the court. The court would pay attention to the talented disciples of the Fulu school, and the Fulu school would also send powerful elders as guests of the court. The Empress was currently lacking manpower, and this was something to be happy about. However, Li Mu did not hear the Empress's happiness. She was like a salted fish as an Empress. She did not have the slightest bit of initiative, nor was she active in doing things. Her most active activity was to run to Li Mu's house to freeload food, and to help Li Mu with the spirit snail to check on him. More than 100 times in 3 days. Not to mention a superior, even a girlfriend rarely did this. Fortunately, Lu Hanyan was different from her. Otherwise, Li Mu would probably go crazy. "In the spirit snail," the Empress said calmly, "you can decide on this matter." This could also be considered a national policy. From a certain point of view, it was Li Mu's duty as the censor of the palace secretariat. However, he still had to ask for the Empress's permission, so as to avoid the bad reputation of a favored official causing chaos in the government. Li Mu sighed. The Empress didn't even care about collaborating with Fulu school. He didn't know what she cared about. On the other side, the Empress no longer mentioned this matter. Instead, she asked, "When are you coming back?" Li Mu replied, "I will do it as soon as possible." The voice in the conch was clearly dissatisfied. "You said it would be quick more than a month ago. How quick is it?" Li Mu explained helplessly. "This time, it's really as fast as possible. The shortest is 3 days, the longest is 5 days." After spending a few days with Lu Hanyan, she went into seclusion with Yu Zhenzi. Li Mu could have returned to the fairy's capital now, but the 7 Peaks disciple competition was about to begin. As a second-generation disciple, he needed to attend. The Empress was really too much. She didn't care about the country's affairs and urged him to go back to work so urgently. This also affected Li Mu's enthusiasm. Great Zhou was her Great Zhou, and Li Mu was working for her. She couldn't always sit at the top and let Li Mu do all the work. She should at least give him some response. This way, Li Mu would have more motivation to do things. Li Mu put down the spirit conch and heard a buzzing sound coming from outside the courtyard. The Dao bell was urging him from outside. Li Mu put away the spirit conch and walked out of the door. He said, "Don't rush me. I'm coming." White Cloud Mountain. Today was the day of the ancestral court of Fulu School's 7 Peaks competition. The all-peak competition was held once every 4 years like the Talisman Dao trial. There was only a month's difference in time. In the past, the results of the Talisman Dao trial would be a hot topic among the disciples of the sect. However, this year, after the trial ended, it didn't cause much of a stir. This was because the trial left too many mysteries for the disciples. First of all, the first place of the previous trial would immediately become a core disciple and receive great support from the sect. They could enjoy cultivation resources that ordinary disciples couldn't enjoy. For a long time after the trial ended, the first place of the trial would be the object of envy of all the disciples. However, the identity of this year's first place was still a mystery. It wasn't just the first place. After the trial ended, the first and second place of the trial completely disappeared as if they had evaporated into thin air. Other than that, on the day of the trial, there was a strange phenomenon on Mount Baiyun. No one knew what was going on. However, according to the ancient books, some disciples guessed that when the sage-level Fu Lu was born, there would be a heavenly tribulation. The strange phenomenon on Mount Baiyun that day was very similar to a heavenly tribulation. As soon as this was said, there were different opinions. Some people said that the sect master drew the sage-level Fu Lu. Some people said that the strange phenomenon was caused by the sect master's advancement to transcendence. Some people said that the person who drew the sage-level Fu Lu was the first place of the trial. However, the sect had never explained this, and this matter had never been concluded. Before the grand competition, the disciples of the various peaks had already gathered around the main peak square. This grand competition was related to the honor of the participating disciples, and also related to the resources that each peak could obtain from the sect in the next 4 years. The top 3 disciples of the grand competition would each receive a heaven-level Fu Lu. The first place of the grand competition would also have the opportunity to become a direct disciple of the sect master and be promoted to a third-generation elder. The top 10 disciples of the grand competition would also receive an earth-level Fu Lu and the opportunity to receive guidance from the sect master. Therefore, every time the grand competition was held, the disciples of the various peaks would do their best to obtain the highest ranking. This was not only for themselves, but also for the honor of the various peaks. Li Mu originally wanted to return to the divine capital as soon as possible so that the empress wouldn't nag him all day long. However, Xian Jizi said that he had to participate in this grand competition. He could skip the disciple recruitment ceremony, but as the disciple of the Grand Elder and a second-generation disciple of the Fu Lu school, he had to show his face in front of the disciples of the ancestral court and the important figures of the Fu Lu school's branches. For this reason, he even gave Li Mu a Taoist name, Ling Jizi. In the Fu Lu school, not everyone had a Taoist name. The third-generation and fourth-generation disciples didn't have high cultivation bases, so most of them called themselves by their secular names. Generally, only after they advanced to the Dongxian level would they consider giving themselves a Taoist name. After all, Sect Master Xian Jizi and Sect Master Yuzhen sounded more like experts than Sect Master Wang Ergu and Sect Master Chen Erniu. Although Li Mu wasn't used to his new Taoist name, he didn't resist it. As soon as Li Mu landed on the main peak square, Hanja walked over from a certain direction and asked in surprise, "You haven't returned to the divine capital yet?" Li Mu replied, "I'll leave after the grand competition." "You'll participate in the grand competition?" Hanja was stunned for a moment. Then a surprised expression appeared on his face. He asked, "You've also joined our Fu Lu school? Don't tell me you've also taken a sect master as your master?" Li Mu shook his head and said, "No." Hanja breathed a sigh of relief and asked, "Which elder is your master?" Li Mu replied, "Fu Daozi." Hanja touched his head and shook his head. "I've never heard of him. Which peak is he from?" Li Mu replied, "The main peak." Hanja said enviously, "The main peak is good. The main peak is full of core disciples. You can have whatever you want. You don't even need to fight. I told you with your relationship with Lu, Martial Uncle Lu, you won't do too badly after joining the sect." Li Mu looked around and asked, "Why haven't I seen Junior Sister Qin today?" At the mention of Junior Sister Qin, Hanja looked helpless and said, "Don't mention it. I told her to reflect on her mistakes behind closed doors." Li Mu asked, "What's wrong with her now? You still have the nerve to ask?" Hanja glared at Li Mu and said, "If you hadn't left first last time, I wouldn't have asked Junior Sister Qin to drink with me. With her alcohol tolerance, she got drunk after just a few glasses. Moreover, she liked to take off her clothes when she was drunk. Not only did she take off her own clothes, but she also took off my clothes. Fortunately, I woke up at the critical moment. Otherwise, I really don't know how to face senior brother Qin's soul in heaven. The primordial young body that I've maintained for more than 20 years might have been lost." Li Mu looked at him sympathetically and said, "Yes, it's too dangerous. Anything can happen when a man and a woman are alone. You'd better protect yourself. If you lose your primordial yang, it will be a big loss." Hanja agreed and said, "I didn't expect Junior Sister Qin to be so bad at drinking. I won't drink with her anymore." While they were chatting, more and more people gathered in the square of the main peak, and the sound of discussion was endless. I wonder which peak senior brother will get first place in the competition this time. The reward for first place is too generous. Not only will you become a third-generation disciple, but you'll also get a heaven-grade Fulu. That's equivalent to having an extra life. I wonder how many people are eyeing those 3 positions. Why is there an extra seat in front? What? Let me count. 1, 2, 3, 8, 9, there's really an extra one. All the disciples looked at the square in front of them, stunned. During the competition, the sect leader and the 7 peak chiefs would watch from the front. Therefore, there would be 8 seats in front of the square. These 8 huge seats were made of spiritual jade and had runes carved on them. They floated in front of the square, dignified and noble, showing the owner's identity and status. The sect leader and the 7 peak chiefs should have 8 seats. This was the usual practice in previous years. However, this year, there were 9 seats in front of the square. Could an elder have advanced to the 6th realm? I don't know. If an elder had advanced, how could the peaks not know? Could it be that one of the Grand Elders has returned? That's not very likely. The Grand Elders have been wandering outside for more than 10 years without any news. Even if they have returned, they have never cared about the competition between the peaks. Hanja looked at the 9 seats in front of him with a puzzled expression. He mumbled, "This year's competition seems a little different from the previous years." When he turned around to look at Li Mu, he seemed to have noticed something. He looked Li Mu up and down a few times before lowering his head to look at himself. He asked in confusion, "Why is your Taoist robe different from mine?" Hanja's Tao robe had a blue base, while Li Mu's Tao robe was mainly white. In the Fulu school, disciples of different levels wore Tao robes of different colors. For 4th-generation disciples like Hanja, their Tao robes were mainly sky blue. For 3rd-generation disciples, the elders of the peaks, their Tao robes were pale yellow. Only the sect leader and the peak chiefs would wear white Tao robes. Before Li Mu could speak, Hanja suddenly seemed to think of something. He looked at him in surprise and said in shock, Fu Daozi. Isn't Fu Daozi the Taoist name of the Grand Supreme Elder who disappeared for a long time? You took the Grand Supreme Elder as your master? Li Mu did not deny it, which was equivalent to admitting to Hanja's words. Hanja was stunned. Ah, really? Li Mu replied. Really? Hanja grabbed his hair and mumbled. Let me straighten it out first. You're a 2nd-generation disciple and I'm a 4th-generation disciple. Doesn't that mean I have to call you Grandmaster Martial Uncle? Li Mu nodded and said, In theory, yes. Hanja suffered a huge blow. Although he didn't want to compare himself to Li Mu, his former friend had now become his martial granduncle. Li Mu even had to bow to him when he saw him in the sect. This was something that Hanja couldn't accept. However, he quickly realized something and raised his head to look at Li Mu. He asked, You're my martial granduncle. Doesn't that mean you're Miss Hanyan's martial granduncle and junior sister Li's martial granduncle? Wait, your relationship is too messy. Let me sort it out. After counting with his fingers, he finally figured it out and said, Junior martial sister Li is no longer a disciple of the Fulu school. But Miss Hanyan is Yu Zhi's disciple. You're Yu Zhi's junior martial brother. So you're her grandmaster martial uncle. You're your future wife's grandmaster martial uncle. Then what's the seniority of your child? Is he the same generation as me or a generation older than me? Wait a minute, I'm confused again. Before Hanja could figure it out, a bell rang from above, indicating that the competition was about to begin. Hanja glanced at Li Mu, then ran away like a wisp of smoke. Li Mu felt that it would be difficult to find him for a drink in the future. As the bell rang, the disciples of the various peaks had already taken their positions outside the square. Several figures flew out from the Tao Palace of the main peak. Xian Jizi and the heads of the various peaks each took a seat. Even Yu Zhi, who was in a state of seclusion, came out and sat to the right of Xian Jizi. Of the 9 chairs, only the one to the left of Xian Jizi was empty. The disciples of the various peaks gathered and began to discuss in low voices. That seat was originally Yu Zhi's. Why is Yu Zhi sitting to the right of the sect master this time? Who else can sit to the left of the sect master? Even if there's a new elder, he doesn't have the qualifications to sit there. Could it really be a grand elder? That should be it. Perhaps one of the elders is interested in watching the grand competition of the mountains. During the competition, the seats in front of the square were carefully chosen. The sect master's position was the most revered. His seat was in the center of the square, while the heads of the various peaks sat on either side of him. Among them, the left side was the most respected. Sitting to the left of the sect master was a position that was second only to the sect master. In the past, this seat had belonged to Yuzhen, the head of Baiyun Peak. However, today, Yuzhen was sitting to the right of the sect master. Apart from the Grand Elder, the disciples couldn't think of anyone else who had a position more respected than Yuzhen. They looked at the seat with curious eyes. Most of the disciples and even the elders had never seen the Grand Elder's true appearance since they entered the sect. Outside the square, the disciples of the various peaks had already returned to their positions. Li Mu stood alone in one corner. He originally thought that he only needed to show his face. He didn't expect Xianjizi to be so serious. Yuzhen was Lu Hanyan's master and half his mother-in-law. Li Mu still felt some psychological pressure to replace her position. Of the 9 seats in front, he was the only one who hadn't taken his seat. Li Mu slowly flew over the square and sat to the left of Xianjizi. The disciples of the various peaks of the Fulu school, the elders, and the important figures invited by the various subsects were almost all paying attention to that seat. When Li Mu took his seat, the square was quiet for a moment. The next moment, it was in an uproar. Countless people looked at that seat with a stunned expression. Who is this person? Why is he sitting in that seat? Could he be one of the Grand Elders? Isn't he the one who scared the runway bell? Why is he sitting in the Grand Elder's seat? During the Talisman Dao trial, Li Mu was always shrouded in fog in the image shown by the dark light technique. Most of the disciples of the Fu Lu school didn't recognize him. Only those who participated in the Talisman Dao trial with him could see his true appearance. At this time, among the disciples of the various peaks, those who passed the Talisman Dao trial were even more shocked. Isn't he the first place of this trial? He finally appeared again, and he's sitting in that seat. That's a seat that only the second-generation disciples can sit in. What qualifications does he have? Could it be? Xianjizi's figure slowly flew up from his seat. He stretched out his hands and pressed down. The noise in the square instantly stopped. He looked back at Li Mu. Li Mu's figure also slowly flew up and stood beside Xianjizi. Xianjizi looked down and said slowly, "The one standing beside me is the disciple of the Grand Elder, Martial Uncle Fu Daozi, junior brother Ling Jizi. From today onwards, every disciple of the Fu Lu school will see him as if they see me." Xianjizi's short words set off waves in the hearts of countless people in the square. The disciples of the Grand Elder were the second-generation disciples of the sect and had the same status as the chiefs. However, not all the chiefs could make the sect masters say, "See him as if they see me." This sentence had always been used on the future sect master. Even the current peak chiefs didn't have such qualifications. The sect master's words were tantamount to announcing that the young man was the future sect master of the Fu Lu school in front of all the important figures of the Fu Lu school subsect. If he was only the disciple of the Grand Elder, then the sect master had no reason to say this. Because all the peak chiefs were the disciples of the Grand Elder. There must be another reason why he could sit to the left of the sect master. Xianjizi floated in the air and said in a dignified voice, "Junior brother Ling Jizi is the champion of the Talisman Dao trial this time." As soon as these words were spoken, the doubts that had been in the hearts of countless people for a month were solved. The champion of the Talisman Dao trial this time was different from all the previous times. There had never been a trial taker who was able to walk above the 50th step. There had also never been anyone who was able to cause a phenomenon of heaven and earth during the trial. The square was in an uproar again. So it's him. That phenomenon should be caused by him. He's the one who drew the Fu Lu Saint rank. No wonder he was accepted as a disciple by the Grand Elder. No wonder the sect master thinks so highly of him. This is simply reaching the heavens in a single step. Chapter 341. Before the grand competition of the peaks began, Fu Lu School's head teacher Xianjizi's short words were like a boulder thrown into a calm lake, stirring up thousands of waves. Being accepted as a disciple by a Grand Elder was not a shocking matter. At most, the disciples were a little envious. However, sitting to the left of the head teacher and being regarded as the future head of Fu Lu School was too inconceivable. Fu Lu School was one of the 6 Taoist sects. Its Taoist teachings were spread throughout the ancestral province, and it had a great influence in the cultivation world. The selection of the Fu Lu School's head teacher was a major matter for the entire cultivation world. After today, The name of Fulu School's Ling Jizi would spread throughout the cultivation world. After this unexpected matter spread, no one paid attention to this competition. Around the square, countless gazes swept back and forth over the young man sitting to the left of Xian Jizi, as if they wanted to see through him. Just what kind of ability did this person have to deserve such attention from Fulu School? Li Mu sat in his chair, feeling the gazes from all around him. At first, he was not used to it, but now, he was calm and collected. Xian Jizi saying these words before the large competition was completely out of Li Mu's expectations. In truth, his motives for joining Fulu School were impure. Whether it was for Li Qing, the Empress, or to become fellow disciples with Lu Hanyan, in short, there was no reason for him to truly join Fulu School. Not to mention becoming the head teacher of Fulu School. At that time, this goal was simply an unrealistic dream for Li Mu. It was just an excuse he used to coax the Empress. But who would have thought that after only a month, his dream would come true? The position of head teacher of Fulu School was not only about glory, status, and responsibility. There were thousands of disciples in the ancestral court, and countless outer disciples. As the head teacher of Fulu School, he had to be responsible for them. In addition, the allocation of the sect's resources, the strengthening and revitalization of the sect, all of this pressure rested on the head teacher alone. Once he became the headmaster, Li Mu would not only have to worry about the Empress, but he would also have to worry about the Fulu School. There were all sorts of things happening in the imperial court, and it was enough to worry about the Empress alone. It was better for the Fulu School to slip away as soon as possible. Before the first day of the competition ended, Li Mu planned to sneak away with Wan Wan and Xiao Bai. After Lu Hanyan's closed-door cultivation ended, she would come to Fairy's capital to look for him. Wan Wan was also alone here, so Li Mu planned to bring her back to Fairy's capital this time. This way, she and Xiao Bai would have each other's company. As soon as the three of them left White Cloud Peak, several figures flew out from the main peak. Xian Jizi looked at Li Mu and asked, "Junior brother, where are you going?" Li Mu smiled and said, "I've been away from Fairy's capital for almost 3 months, and His Majesty has urged me many times. It's time for me to go back. If Master comes out of closed-door cultivation, I'll have to trouble you to inform him." Xian Jizi nodded and said, "Junior brother, you must cultivate diligently this time. Whether or not our Fulu School can prosper in the future will depend on you." Li Mu said awkwardly, "My cultivation is low now, and I can't take on the responsibility of the school. In the next few decades, the school will have to rely on you, senior brothers and sisters." As soon as Li Mu finished speaking, another stream of light flew out from the main peak. The law bell became the size of a palm and flew around Li Mu, circling around him. During this time, with Li Mu's help, the cracks on the law bell had healed by half. Li Mu reached out his hand, and the law bell obediently landed in his palm. Li Mu patted the law bell lightly and said, "I'm leaving. I'll come and see you again in the future." The law bell flew up again, buzzed a few times, and landed on his shoulder. Li Mu shook his head and said, "You have to stay on White Cloud Peak." "You can't go with me," Xian Jizi thought for a moment and said, "If the law bell is willing to follow you, then let it follow you." Li Mu looked at the law bell and gulped. He said, "That's not good. Without the law bell, what will happen to White Cloud Peak?" Xian Jizi said, "Don't worry. Our Fulu School hasn't fallen to the point where we need a spiritual treasure to protect us. Besides, the cracks on the law bell still need to be repaired by you. Only when the law bell is complete can it be used to its full potential." Li Mu said reluctantly, "All right then." After bidding farewell to Xian Jizi and the other first seats, the three of them and the law bell quickly flew away from White Cloud Peak. Hyun Jinko looked ahead until their figures disappeared. Then he said slowly, "It's good to let the law bell follow Junior Ling Jizi. If he encounters danger, it can protect him. However, senior brother, have you thought it through? The headmaster of Fulu School doesn't only need attainments in the Tao of Talismans or cultivation, but also responsibility." Xian Jizi smiled and said, "Since we've already taken a gamble, why don't we take another one?" North County, Yongqiu County. In the courtyard of the old mansion, Li Mu looked at Su He and asked, "Are you really not coming back to the divine capital with me?" Su He shook her head and said, "I've been in the same place all these years, and I'm getting tired of it. I don't want to be stuck in one place anymore. I want to go to other places and see other sceneries. I'll look for you when I'm tired of it." After 20 years, she no longer had any family or friends. Li Mu wanted her to return to the divine capital with him, because he wanted her to have a home to return to. However, she had been trapped in the Bay of Clearwater for 20 years and couldn't take a single step out of that tiny place. She indeed needed to go out. The divine capital seemed lively, but it was also a prison. Once she stayed there for a long time, it would become another Bay of Clearwater to her. Li Mu looked at her and said, "Come back when you're tired. There'll always be a courtyard for you there." After having the last hot pot meal with Su He, she gave Li Mu a hug and then left with the two female ghosts, one big and one small. Li Mu naturally hoped that Su He could stay by his side. However, he also understood that after taking revenge, what she needed the most was freedom. Only complete freedom could heal the trauma in her heart for the past 20 years. After Su He left, the three of them didn't stay in the old mansion. Li Mu released a flying boat that Fu Daozi had gotten from the Green Bamboo Peak's first seat, Dong Shuzi. It carried Xiao Bai and Wan Wan and flew towards the divine capital. This flying boat was also a heaven-grade Dharma treasure. When driven by spiritual power, its highest flying speed was comparable to the sixth realm. Li Mu controlled the flying boat. When he was about to fly out of the North County, he suddenly felt a strong sense of danger. Almost instantly, a Fu Lu appeared in his hand. Driven by spiritual power, the Fu Lu turned into a golden light shield that covered the flying boat. Boom! Several spiritual power attacks landed on the light shield. The light shield shook violently, and the flying boat also started to shake violently. High up in the sky wasn't suitable for fighting. Li Mu first sent Xiao Bai and Wan Wan into the flask heaven space. Then, he controlled the flying boat to descend rapidly. When he landed on the ground, he put away the flying boat. Several figures appeared around him and surrounded him from several directions. A figure covered in ghostly qi looked at Li Mu and said eerily, "We've been guarding here for more than 2 months. We thought you were going to hide in the Fu Lu school for the rest of your life and not come out." Another brawny man with a towering demonic qi grinned and said, "You're finally willing to leave White Cloud Mountain. You made us wait for a long time." Li Mu looked at the two figures in front of him. One of them was a demon, and the other was a ghost. Clearly, they were both fifth realm powerhouses. Not only that, but the other 5 people beside and behind him also exuded an aura that was not weaker than the fifth realm. 7 fifth realm powerhouses. Even the Imperial Court's pursuit of Cui Ming didn't have such a big lineup. These 7 people all had a towering baleful aura, and their auras were strange. Clearly, they were not orthodox cultivators. Li Mu glanced at them and asked, "You were sent by the demon sect?" The fifth realm ghost said, "You have good eyesight." Li Mu pursed his lips and said, "You 7 fifth realm powerhouses ganged up to bully me, a 4th realm powerhouse. Are all demonic cultivators as shameless as you?" The demon chuckled and said, "Cui Ming of the Meizong sect and Emperor Song of the Soul sect both died in your hands. We don't want to end up like them. Compared to our lives, what's face worth?" Beside Li Mu, a beautiful woman smiled and said, "Little brother, you'd better surrender. This time, our 7 sects have joined forces. You won't be able to escape. Be obedient and you'll suffer less." At this moment, Li Mu still didn't know what was going on. There were only 10 sects in the demonic path. Moreover, the sects weren't completely united. Some sects even viewed each other as enemies. This time, 7 sects had joined forces and guarded the North County for more than 2 months just to stop him. Without Su He by his side, Li Mu was alone. Without the help of Fu Lu, he could at most fight to a draw with one of them. He had no chance of winning against the 7 of them. Li Mu looked at them and said, "7 against 1? What's the big deal? If you have the ability, come one by one." The ghost clearly didn't want to talk about fairness with Li Mu. He said, "This person can kill Cui Ming and Emperor Song. He must have some tricks up his sleeve. Let's attack together and split the rewards equally." Li Mu looked at them and said angrily, "You want to compete with me in terms of numbers?" As his voice fell, a stack of Fu Lu appeared in his hand. Li Mu threw out the Fu Lu. 18 Fu Lu floated in the air and surrounded Li Mu and the 7 people. Illusory figures emerged from the talisman one after another. Every illusory figure had the aura of a 5th realm cultivator. The 7 people who were originally surrounding Li Mu were now surrounded by these 18 phantoms. The situation was instantly reversed. The 18 shadows that emerged from the Fu Lu formed a formation. The 7 people's expressions changed. The ghost decisively formed two ghost claws and grabbed at Li Mu's vitals. Li Mu still had a Fu Lu in his hand. Facing the two ghost claws, Li Mu didn't dodge. He only activated the Fu Lu in his hand. His figure disappeared on the spot. The next time he appeared, he was already outside the formation. The Fu Lu school's research on Fu Lu had reached the peak. Talisman Daozi was a genius in this field. He was best at talisman formations. His talisman formations weren't inferior to the profound formations of the spirit formation sect. The ghost claws missed. Before the 7 people could react, the 18 shadows had already attacked them. One of the figures held a huge sword and slashed at the ghost. The ghost was hit by the huge sword and its figure immediately faded. It warned loudly, "Be careful, this sword specializes in injuring the soul." Another figure's hand seals changed. Within the formation, dense purple lightning fell from the sky. The lightning covered a wide area, and almost covered every corner of the formation. The 7 people couldn't avoid it and could only resist it. At this moment, a flame rose under their feet. This flame wasn't an ordinary flame. It seemed to even burn their souls and soul. The 7 people joined forces to defend against the lightning above their heads and the flame under their feet. Within the formation, a green wind suddenly blew. When the wind blew on their bodies, it was as if it was cutting their flesh and bones. Even the strong demon couldn't help but roar in pain. The rest of the people were screaming in pain. Li Mu stood outside the formation with his arms crossed. He looked at the 7 people trapped in the formation and said coldly, "Scream. Even if you scream until your throat is broken, no one will come to save you." Chapter 342. There were many branches of Taoism. Fu Lu, pills, formations, martial Tao, divine arts. Under each major branch, there were countless smaller branches. The cultivation world revered divine arts and Taoist techniques. Xuanzong, which was famous for its Taoist techniques and divine arts, was also the strongest among the 6 sects of Taoism. Comparatively speaking, Fu Lu school was a minority in the cultivation world. However, no one dared to look down on a minority like Fu Lu school. It was to the extent that most of the cultivators would rather compete with the disciples of the Xian sect in terms of divine path and arts or engage in close combat with the disciples of the South sect than to fight with the disciples of the Talisman sect. This was because they didn't know the trump cards of Fu Lu school disciples. Once they looked down on Fu Lu school disciples, they would end up in such an awkward situation. Li Mu, a small cultivator at the 4th realm, had trapped 7 cultivators at the 5th realm in a talisman array with 18 upper-grade Earth-rank golden armor talismans and a short-distance teleportation talisman. Talisman Daozi deserved to be a genius in the Tao of talismans that was hard to come by in the last few hundred years of the talisman sect's history. This 18 Heavens Grand formation that was formed from 18 golden armor talismans was something he'd obtained inspiration from the 18 Nether Prison Grand formation of the Devil Tao, and he'd spent a few years of time researching it. This talisman array not only had a power equal to the 18 prison array, it also overcame the 18 prison array's weakness. The 18 prison array set up by Chu Jiang of Gojoseon required 18 ghost generals to sacrifice their lives. Moreover, their positions couldn't be moved. The 18 Heavens array only required 18 golden armor talismans. The array was portable and mobile. The power of the array was related to the Fu Lu's grade. 18 Earth high-grade Fu Lu could trap Dongxian. If there were 18 Heaven high-grade Fu Lu, it wouldn't be a problem to trap a Transcendence Realm cultivator. These golden armor talismans each had their own divine arts. The 7 people in the array had to endure 18 different attacks. They complained incessantly and could only work together to create a dermic power shield. They hid within the shield and passively defended. The ghost cultivator among the 7 was King Wuguan, a subordinate of the Nether Hell Saint. He also had the highest cultivation among the 7. As he used his mana to maintain the defensive shield, he observed the 18 heavenly soldiers and said, "Everyone, don't panic. The Fu Lu can only be maintained for a limited time. Once the spiritual energy is exhausted, it will lose its effect. As long as we hold on for a while longer, he will be at his wit's end." The 7 of them were caught off guard by the 18 heavenly soldiers. It was only then that they realized why the Heavenly Lord would place a bounty on a mere 4th realm cultivator. Although his own strength was weak, Fu Lu was really powerful. Cui Ming and Emperor Song deserved to die in his hands. Li Mu stood outside the array. Ever since the 7 of them gave up attacking and joined forces to resist, The situation on the battlefield had become a stalemate. Although the Fulu formation was simple and easy to carry, it also had its flaws. If the 18 Capital Heaven formation was set up by 18 Creation Realm experts, their mana would be endless. When it was exhausted, spiritual jades could be used to replenish it. The array could last for a long time. However, the Fulu's spiritual energy was limited and could not last indefinitely. The few of them joined forces to create such a protective shield. As time passed, it was possible that it could last until the Fulu's spiritual energy was exhausted. King Wuguan hid in the shield and looked at Li Mu mockingly. He said, "Emperor Song died in your hands like this. I don't believe it. Your Fulu's spiritual energy is endless. Let's see how long you can trap us." Of course, the Fulu's spiritual energy was not endless. At most, in 15 minutes, these heavenly soldiers would dissipate due to the exhaustion of their spiritual energy. Of course, Li Mu had more than one set of array talismans in his hands. Because a certain first seat really did not have anything good to give as a meeting gift, Talisman Daozi had extorted many talisman materials. Li Mu had used them to draw many Fulu formations. Just the 18 Capital Heaven formations array talismans alone was enough for him to gather 2 sets. However, Li Mu was not willing to use both sets of array talismans on these people from the demon sect. He whistled. Suddenly, something flew out of his ear. At first, it was so small that it was almost invisible. In an instant, it grew to about 10 feet tall. Li Mu whistled again. The enlarged Dao bell suddenly charged into the array formation. Under the horrified gazes of the 7 people, it fiercely slammed into the protective shield that they had conjured. When the Dao bell hit the shield, it was like an egg hitting a rock. It instantly collapsed. Puff, among the 7 people, those with physical bodies spat out blood. Those without physical bodies had their souls dissipated. What was more serious was that without the protection of the shield, the 7 of them had to face the attacks of the 18 heavenly soldiers again. King Wuguan was already seriously injured. After the shield disappeared, he was caught off guard by a thunderbolt. His soul was even more scattered. He used the last of his spiritual energy to resist the burning of the Samadhi true fire. At this moment, a heavenly soldier had already slashed down with a giant golden sword in his hand. "No!" King Wuguan roared. His voice was filled with unwillingness and fear. As the giant sword fell, King Wuguan's soul collapsed and turned into pure spiritual energy. Of the 7 people from the demon sect, only 6 were left. Following that, the beautiful woman's physical body was finally destroyed after enduring several attacks. Her primordial spirit had just escaped when it was sucked into the Samadhi true fire. After letting out a series of shrill cries, it was quickly burned into nothingness. There was also a man in a red robe. When he saw that 2 of his companions had already been killed by the array formation, his body decisively exploded, turning into a cloud of blood mist. It was unknown what mysteries this blood mist had, but it actually passed through the array formation directly. After escaping from the array formation, the blood mist didn't stop at all. Without hesitation, it fled into the distance. Li Mu looked at the blood mist in the distance and threw out another Fulu. The Fulu turned into a small purple person. Inside the small person's body, lightning flashed chaotically and emitted a terrifying pressure. With a step, it crossed a distance of several hundred feet and appeared in the blood mist. After the small lightning person exploded, an extremely shrill scream came from within the blood mist. The blood mist began to boil and eventually evaporate into nothingness. The blood sect expert's body and soul were also destroyed. After the protective shield was destroyed by the Dao Bell, 3 of the 7 demon sect experts were killed in the blink of an eye. The remaining 4 were scared out of their wits and joined forces to break out of the encirclement. However, in the face of 18 divine weapons of the same level as them, they could only hold on for a while before they followed in the footsteps of the previous 3. Not long after, the spiritual energy of the 18 Fulu was exhausted. The figures of the divine weapons slowly dissipated between the heaven and earth. Of the 7 people in the array formation, only the monster was left. Its intelligence had been erased and its eyes had lost their light. It was only left with a walking corpse. Li Mu walked over and pressed his hand on its head. Although the monster was at the 5th level, its intelligence had been erased. Li Mu could easily search its memories. 10,000 Illusions Lord, Bounty, Enlightenment page. After searching through the monster's memories, Li Mu's face was filled with astonishment. It turned out that after he killed the 10,000 Illusions Lord's avatar, the 10,000 Illusions Lord had issued a bounty for him. As time passed, the bounty on his head became heavier and heavier. At first, the bounty was only a precious treasure and personal guidance. Later, the bounty was increased. Anyone who captured or killed Li Mu would get a chance to comprehend the Tao page. This bounty had caused many people in the demon sect to fall into a frenzy. Li Mu didn't expect that the demon sect would also have a Tao page. If the Tao page in the hands of the 10,000 Illusions Lord was the same as the one in the Fulu school, then there might be some kind of inheritance in that Tao page. The Talisman Tao of the Fulu school, the Alchemy Tao of the Elixir Cauldron sect, the Array Tao of the Spirit Array sect, Xuanzong's Divine Power, the Martial Tao of the South sect, and the Artifact Refining Tao of the North sect were all comprehended and passed down by the seniors in the sect from the Tao pages. Which one did the 10,000 Illusions Lord have? Li Mu casually struck the monster with a bolt of lightning and turned it into ashes. He released the flying boat again and didn't let Wan Wan and Xiao Bai come out. The 10,000 Illusions Lord had spent a lot on him. The journey from the North County to the Divine Capital wouldn't be peaceful. Li Mu left on the flying boat. 15 minutes later, several figures rushed over from afar. There are strong traces of a battle here. Did King Wuguan and the others beat us to it? Damn it, this place is too close to Baiyun Mountain. We were worried that the Fulu school would discover us, so we stayed a little further away. I didn't expect them to beat us to it. Chase! We still don't know who will win. King Wuguan and the others have just experienced a great battle and might not be able to unleash their full strength. If we join forces, we won't be afraid of them. Only one person can comprehend the Tao pages. How are we going to split them? Let's capture that Li Mu first. 3 days later. Jiangyin County. Li Mu flew across the sky on the flying boat. His clothes were a little messy, and a few strands of his hair fluttered in the wind. He looked a little wretched. It would only take a little more than a day to travel from the North County to the Divine Capital with a flying boat at full speed. However, 3 days had passed, and Li Mu was still more than half the distance to the Divine Capital. The people from the demon sect clearly knew his whereabouts. Along the way, Li Mu was blocked by the demon sect's experts several times. More than 50 people from the demon sect had died in his hands. Among them, there were more than 20 people who were at the 5th realm. Because of this, Li Mu's Fulu had decreased by more than half. After all, his cultivation was only at the divine power level. If he encountered several 5th realm experts at the same time, he could only rely on his Fulu to win. Comprehending the Tao pages was too attractive to cultivators. Along the way, Li Mu didn't only encounter people from the demon sect. Even many cultivators who weren't from the demon sect couldn't resist the temptation of the Tao pages. Li Mu didn't hold back at all to anyone who wanted to take his life. This was also the reason why his Fulu was depleted so quickly. 2 months ago, because of the myriad Illusion Lord's bounty, there were people from the demon sect lying in ambush along the way from the North County to the Divine Capital. Li Mu advanced along the original route and directly entered their encirclement several times. Therefore, he simply chose to take a detour. Although this would waste a lot of time, the speed of the flying boat was comparable to that of Dongxian. As long as they weren't ambushed halfway, they wouldn't be able to catch up to Li Mu. Most of the people who blocked the way were at the 4th realm and 5th realm. He hadn't encountered any 6th realm experts yet, but Li Mu didn't let down his guard at all. The temptation of the Tao pages was too great. It was possible that 6th realm experts wouldn't be tempted. After taking a detour, he didn't encounter any more people from the demon sect. Li Mu accelerated the flying boat but suddenly stopped at a certain moment. A figure floated in the air a few hundred feet in front of him. That person looked to be in his 20s. He wore a long black robe and his hair was tied up in a bun. His appearance was somewhat scholarly. His hands were clasped behind his back as he stood facing Li Mu. His gaze was indifferent. The moment he saw this person, Li Mu became extremely vigilant. He just stood there casually. There wasn't a trace of spiritual power fluctuation on his body. He looked no different from a mortal. But he definitely wasn't a mortal. The only possibility was that his cultivation was 2 realms higher than Li Mu's. That person looked at Li Mu and said, "I've been waiting for you here for a long time." Li Mu stood on the flying boat. Some memories belonging to the 1,000 Illusions venerable master surfaced in his mind. Li Mu wasn't unfamiliar with this person. To be precise, He wasn't unfamiliar with the Thousand Illusions' venerable master. The 10 sects of the demon sect didn't have a sect master. They were led by the Grand Elder. Chu Jiang of Gojoseon, Emperor Song, and King Wuguan's master was this person. He was the Soul Sect's Grand Elder, the Nether Saint. Although this person looked young, he was actually an old monster who had entered the 6th realm many years ago. His strength was considered average among the 6th realm. This time, he actually took action personally. Li Mu was very clear about his strength. Not to mention that Su He wasn't here. Even if Su He was here and the two of them combined, they still wouldn't be a match for the Nether Saint. But Li Mu wasn't worried. Although he couldn't defeat the Nether Saint couldn't do anything to him. With the Dao Bell, even if he encountered a transcendent, Li Mu would be in an invincible position. He put away the flying boat and floated in the air. At a certain moment, his temperament changed. He looked at the Nether Saint and asked, "We haven't seen each other for a few years. Nether Saint, don't you recognize me?" As Li Mu's voice fell, the Nether Saint was dazed for a moment. Then, his expression changed greatly. He said in shock, You are the Thousand Illusions' venerable master. Weren't your body and soul destroyed?" Chapter 343. Li Mu floated in the air with his hands behind his back as he looked at the Nether Hell Saint from afar. After a moment of shock, the Nether Hell Saint quickly regained his senses and said, "Qian Huan's soul lamp has been extinguished, and his soul has already dispersed. You can't be Qian Huan. You have obtained his memories." The Nether Hell Saint wasn't as gullible as Chu Jiang of Gojoseon. After being exposed, Li Mu decisively took out the mid-grade Heaven-tier golden armor talisman. After the Fulu burned, it condensed into a golden armored figure that emitted a 6th realm aura. With a thought from Li Mu, the golden armor talisman flew towards the Nether Hell Saint with a huge sword. At the same time, Li Mu also released the flying boat and shot into the distance. The Nether Hell Saint wanted to give chase but was blocked by the golden armored divine soldier. The Nether Hell Saint watched Li Mu disappear from his sight from afar. He reached out his hand and condensed a black soul sword in his hand. He then clashed with the golden armored divine soldier's golden giant sword. On the flying boat, Li Mu used all his strength to activate this treasure and quickly fled forward. Even though he was no longer who he used to be, a powerhouse of the 6th level was still an insurmountable mountain to him. The Nether Hell Saint's strength was considered average among the 6th realm experts. That golden armor talisman wasn't a true 6th realm expert, and the spiritual power in the Fulu was limited. It couldn't stop him for long. Along the way, Li Mu met many people from the Demon Dao, but he didn't expect that even the 6th realm Nether Hell Saint, a Grand Elder of a sect, would be summoned. With his current strength, he could handle anyone below the 6th realm. In order to hone his combat ability, Li Mu didn't send a message to White Cloud Mountain. Along the way, he was more proficient in both divine arts and the use of the Fulu. But when the Nether Hell Saint attacked, he couldn't handle it alone. Li Mu steered the flying boat and flew forward at full speed for about an hour. At a certain point, he sensed another powerful aura behind him. "You can't escape." The Nether Saint's sinister voice sounded from behind. As soon as he said that, a long spear condensed from black chi shot out from behind. It seemed to be constantly traversing space. It was faster than the flying boat, heading straight for Li Mu. Li Mu whistled, and a giant bell instantly enveloped his body. Dong! The black chi spear smashed into the giant bell, creating a deafening sound. The spear collapsed, and the surrounding 300 meters was filled with sand and stones. Trees were uprooted, and a huge shockwave continued to spread out. Li Mu was not affected at all within the Dao Bell, but the Nether Hell Saint was already approaching. The Nether Hell Saint was outside the bell and could only see the giant bell. He couldn't see the situation inside the bell. His face was filled with surprise. The spear he threw seemed casual, but it was actually his full-strength attack. Everything within 1,000 feet of him was turned into ruins by the recoil, but the bell was unharmed. He condensed another soul sword in his hand and slashed at the Dao Bell. Dong! Another deafening sound rang out. The soul sword in the Nether Hell Saint's hand dissipated, and his body was also forced back a few steps. The defense of the bell was beyond imagination. The Nether Hell Saint retreated 30 meters, and countless black chi gushed out from his body. The black chi condensed into several giant pythons, which twisted their bodies and crashed into the giant bell. Dong! 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 The giant pythons dissipated when they crashed into the bell, but the giant bell remained in its original position, undamaged. Lord Netherhell's expression darkened, and he tried to attack it several more times, but it was still to no avail. The sturdiness of this bell was beyond his imagination. Even with his sixth realm power, he was actually unable to do anything to it. The recoil from the bell caused his own aura to become unstable instead. He looked at the bell again and finally discovered something. His body transformed into a ball of black chi and completely enveloped the bell. Li Mu stood inside the bell and observed the Netherhell Saint's every move. The Netherhell Saint's black chi completely enveloped the Dao bell. Li Mu didn't know what the Netherhell Saint was doing, but in the next moment, his expression changed. Wisps of black chi were seeping in from the cracks on the Dao bell. Li Mu didn't hesitate to throw out that set of array talismans again. The 18 golden armored soldiers appeared again and formed a talisman array, trapping the Dao bell and the black chi in it. One of the soldiers slashed at the black chi with his giant golden sword. Another soldier formed hand seals with both hands, and thunder exploded in the black chi. As for the other two soldiers, one transformed into a frost giant, and the other into a flame giant. They pounced at the black chi. The 18 soldiers each used their own abilities. The black chi rolled, and the Netherhell Saint appeared again. He had 2 soul swords in his hands, and one of them shattered the giant golden sword of the soldier. After withstanding several thunderbolts, the Netherhell Saint only had an unstable aura. He swung the other sword, and the frost giant and the flame giant immediately collapsed. When the 2 soldiers reformed again, their bodies were much dimmer. The great heavenly array could trap a cultivator who had just entered the 6th realm, but it was still difficult to trap a long-established expert like the Netherhell Saint. Moreover, Li Mu could see from the Dao bell that the Netherhell Saint seemed to be very effective against these divine soldiers that didn't have physical bodies. In less than 15 minutes, this talisman array would run out of spiritual power and dissipate. At this moment, Li Mu's Fu Lu was almost used up. He had used all his trump cards, and he had no other choice but to hide in the Dao bell. Li Mu stretched out his hand, and a jade talisman appeared in his palm. The Empress had given it to him before he left the divine capital. The Empress didn't tell Li Mu what the talisman was for. She only told him that he could crush the talisman in an emergency. Boom! At this moment, a loud sound came from outside the Dao bell. Li Mu looked outside the Dao bell and realized that the Netherhell Saint had already broken the talisman array. It was much faster than he had expected. The Netherhell Saint floated in front of the Dao bell and sized it up. He said, "This Dao bell is a good treasure, but it's a pity that it's incomplete." The Dao bell buzzed and slammed toward the Netherhell Saint. The Netherhell Saint disappeared, and the Dao bell's attack missed. When the Netherhell Saint appeared again, he was already on top of the Dao bell. He pressed his palm down, and the Dao bell was pressed to the ground. Li Mu looked up and crushed the jade talisman in his hand without hesitation. The jade talisman shattered, and it seemed like nothing had happened. However, the Netherhell Saint's expression changed. He immediately retreated a few hundred feet and looked in Li Mu's direction with vigilance. The space in front of the Dao bell fluctuated, and a figure stepped out of the void. "Your Majesty! The Empress of the Great Show!" The voices of Li Mu and the Netherhell Saint could be heard. One was surprised, while the other was frightened. However, the latter's fear quickly turned into calmness. The Netherhell Saint looked at the illusory figure of the woman in front of him and heaved a sigh of relief. He said, "So it's just a divine clone. If your true body came, I would naturally retreat. However, a mere divine clone that has just reached the 6th stage of cultivation, what can you do to me?" The Empress looked at him indifferently and said, "You are not worthy for me to come personally." The Netherhell Saint reached into his chest and took out a pair of ghastly hook-shaped weapons. He smiled at the Empress and said, "I have long wanted to see what the Empress of the Great Zhou is capable of." As he spoke, his figure had already disappeared from where he stood. Li Mu's mind moved, and the Qingxian sword appeared in his hand. He threw the Qingxian sword forward and said, "Your Majesty, take this." The Empress stretched out her hand, and the Qingxian sword flew into her hand. She casually swung her sword, and the Netherhell Saint's hooks appeared from the void and collided with the Qingxian sword. The ground within a radius of several hundred feet immediately collapsed. Li Mu hid in the Dao bell and could not see the two figures. He could only feel waves of powerful magic power fluctuations. His surroundings were already in a mess because of the aftermath of the battle. He was in the center of the battle between two six-stage cultivators. If it were not for the protection of the Dao Bell, he would have been severely injured even if he did not die. With Li Mu's cultivation, he could not even see the two figures clearly. Naturally, he did not know who had the upper hand. However, the Nether Hell Saint was the true body, and the Empress was only a divine clone. A divine clone could not exist for long. Li Mu's mind spun rapidly. He decisively walked out of the Dao Bell and shouted, "Your Majesty, enter my body." In the void, a figure paused for an instant. Then, without hesitation, it returned and entered Li Mu's body. Li Mu's aura instantly surged. From the divine arts realm, he quickly broke through the creation realm and finally gave off the aura of the early stage of Dongxian. The Nether Hell Saint floated high in the sky and looked down at Li Mu. Although the aura on his body was similar to the Empress of Great Zhou's divine clone, the current Li Mu gave him an extremely dangerous feeling. Li Mu raised his head and looked at the Nether Hell Saint. He cracked his knuckles and said, "It's my turn." Yudu's ghost region. It was a place that was forever shrouded in darkness and could not see the sun. In a palace that was filled with a ghostly aura, a weak light shone. In front of the palace, 2 rows of ghostly blue lights flickered with a strange light. There were 2 rows of lights. The first row only had 1 light, and the second row had 7 lights. That 1 light was brighter than the other 7 lights combined. 2 ghostly figures stood in front of the palace and conversed softly. His Highness Chu Jiang of Gojoseon is dead. His Highness Emperor Song is dead. His Highness King Wuguan is also dead. There are only 7 Yama Kings of the 10 halls left under the saint. I wonder who will replace them in the future. When the saint returns, he will probably fly into a rage again. I hope it won't affect us. The 2 ghostly figures conversed softly and turned back to look at the light that was burning the brightest. Fear appeared on their faces. In the next moment, the fear on their faces turned into astonishment. The light that was burning peacefully suddenly started to shake violently. What happened? Could it be that the saint is fighting with someone? The saint might have met a 6th realm strong practitioner of the righteous path. The 2 ghostly figures' faces were filled with fear as they quickly ran into the palace. However, before they could reach the front of the palace, the light that was burning the brightest in the first row suddenly extinguished after shaking violently for a while. The 2 ghostly figures fell to the ground. Their faces were filled with astonishment, and their voices were filled with boundless fear. The saint has fallen. Chapter 344. The 10 sects of the Devil Path were spread all over Ancestral State. Among them, the Soul Sect was located in the ghost region of Yudu. At this moment, the Soul Palace was in chaos. A soul lamp was a soul flame that was ignited using the soul as a guide. Its function was no different from a life talisman. If the soul lamp burned, the owner's life would not be in danger. If the soul lamp extinguished, it meant that the owner's soul had dissipated. All the experts of the Soul Sect, including the Great Elder Nether Saint Monarch, had left their soul lamps in the Soul Palace. More than half a year ago, Chu Jiang of Gojoseon's soul lamp extinguished. 3 months ago, Emperor Song's soul lamp extinguished. 3 days ago, King Wuguan's soul lamp went out. Today, the Nether Saint's soul lamp was extinguished. The Great Elder was the faith of the sect. The sudden extinguishing of his soul lamp had caused a great uproar in the Soul Sect. Countless disciples of the Soul Sect were at a loss when they heard that the Great Elder's soul lamp had extinguished. The entire Soul Palace was in chaos. How did the Grand Elder's soul lamp go out? Could it be that the Great Elder has really fallen? The Great Elder has fallen. What's going to happen to the Soul Sect? What are we going to do? Shut up! An angry roar came from outside the palace, causing the chaos in the Soul Palace to calm down. The ghosts saw a tall and sturdy figure floating in from outside the palace. They all bowed and said loudly, "Greetings, Your Highness King Qingguang." King Qingguang walked to the front of the hall and looked at the extinguished soul lamp in the first row. His face darkened completely. As long as the owner's soul was not extinguished, his soul lamp would last forever. If the sage's soul lamp was extinguished for no reason, it meant that he had already died. It was very likely that he had encountered a righteous expert when he went out to investigate the cause of Emperor Song's death. King Qingguang looked at the extinguished soul lamp again and said in a deep voice, "King Pingdeng, King Kakravarti." 2 ghostly figures floated in from outside the palace and said, "Big brother," King Qingguang said, "something has happened to the Holy Monarch." I'm going to report to the sacred sect. You two stay here and guard the soul sect. Don't let anything happen here. The two of them replied in unison. Yes. King Qingguang floated out of Soul Palace and quickly disappeared. Under the pacification and suppression of the King of Equality and the King of Chakravarti, the chaos in the Soul sect gradually subsided. At the entrance of Soul Palace, the two little ghosts let out a light breath. I didn't expect that an existence like a saint would actually fall. I don't know who killed the saint monarch. The sage has fallen. King Wuguan's death cannot be blamed on us. What you said makes sense. The death of the first elder was a huge matter. Naturally, it was impossible to hide it. Soon, through a special method of communication, the various demonic Dao sects learned of this matter. Because of this news, all of the demonic path subsects were in an uproar. What? Yu Ming has fallen? How is that possible? Who would have the ability to kill him? Could it be that he encountered a righteous seventh realm cultivator? Damn it! First it was the 1,000 illusions, and now it's the netherworld. Do they really think that our demon sect is easy to bully? In the past year, the demon sect had lost 2 first elders. Among them, the 1,000 illusions of the corpse sect had already reached the peak of the 6th realm. He had hopes of peaking into the Transcendence Great Tao. The Sage sect had high hopes for him. Once the 1,000 illusions of the 1,000 illusions advanced, the demon sect would have another supreme expert. Although the Netherworld Saint's strength was not as strong as the 1,000 illusions of the 1,000 illusions, he was still in charge of a sect. He was one of the core higher-ups of the demon sect. His fall made the strongest Sage sect elder of the 10 sects furious. He ordered all of the demon sect disciples to investigate this matter. After leaving the ghost region of Yudu, the Netherworld Saint did not hide his tracks. Some of the demon sect disciples in the north region knew that the first elder of the soul sect was chasing after Li Mu, who was wanted by the Heavenly Lord, because of the death of his subordinate. Later on, a disciple provided information that he had seen the battle between the Netherworld Saint and Li Mu from afar in Jiangyin County. However, because he was afraid of being affected by their battle, he hid from afar. He originally thought that the bounty this time would be taken by the Lord Saint. Who would have thought that the first elder of the soul sect would also die in the hands of Li Mu? This news was no different from a sudden clap of thunder. It shocked many people. Using this matter, the various demon sect sects exchanged information and found out that in these 3 days, dozens of demon sect disciples had died in the hands of Li Mu. Among them, there was no lack of 5th realm experts. More than 25th realm experts, and 1 6th realm first elder. After knowing this number, those demon sect disciples who were still dreaming of capturing or killing Li Mu alive to obtain the Heavenly Lord's reward instantly extinguished this thought. Although the reward was great, one still needed to be alive to receive it. Even the first elder of the soul sect, a 6th realm expert, had died in body and soul. How could they be stronger than the Netherworld Saint? After this incident, Li Mu's name had become a kind of deterrent in the demon sect's 10 sects. Shen Du. Li residence. Li Mu lay on a chair as Xiao Bai massaged his shoulders. Wan peeled the seedless grapes from the west region that the Empress had rewarded him and fed him. It was good to have one more person at home. It was really a wise decision for him to bring Wan to Shendu. His days in Shendu were much more leisurely and comfortable. After returning from the north region, Li Mu wasn't in a hurry to go to the secretariat. Instead, he enjoyed the last of his leisure time at home. Of course, he didn't spend all his time enjoying the service of Wan and Xiao Bai. After returning to Shendu, Li Mu spent most of his time repairing the Dao Bell. Because of his own sins, he almost died in the hands of the Netherworld Saint. The Dao Bell enveloped Li Mushi. Other than the bell's body, the bottom of the bell was also impenetrable. The only flaw was the crack on the bell's body, which had almost allowed the Nether Hell Saint to take advantage of it. In the end, he had to crush the jade talisman that the Empress had given him to allow the Empress's avatar to descend. If one were to say that the Empress doted on him, the bunch of old men from the Fulu school wouldn't be so considerate. After being possessed by the Empress avatar, Li Mu's cultivation temporarily reached the early stage of the 6th realm. With the help of Dao techniques, he was almost invincible below the 7th realm. The Netherworld Saint was only at the middle stage of the 6th realm. Under the joint attack of Li Mu and the Empress, he couldn't even escape. Li Mu had never thought that he would have the chance to kill a 6th realm expert with his own hands. In terms of strength, People like Lord Thousand Illusions and the various peak masters were unreachable in his eyes. However, when he was possessed by the Empress, Li Mu even developed a kind of confidence that he could compete with a transcendent being. Of course, this confidence also disappeared without a trace when the Empress avatar left. Back then, Cui Ming sacrificed his blood essence and lifespan to allow the 10,000 Illusions Lord to descend. The Empress avatar descended without any sacrifice. She used her own great magic power to break open space and force the avatar to travel thousands of miles. The Empress herself also paid a considerable price because of this. After Li Mu returned to the Immortals' capital, she went into seclusion and didn't hold morning court for 2 times. At a certain moment, the space in the courtyard fluctuated, and a familiar figure appeared before Li Mu's eyes. Xiaobai ran over quickly and said happily, "Big Sister Zhou, you're here." She pulled Wan Wan and introduced her to Zhou Yi. "Big Sister Zhou, this is the Big Sister Wan Wan I always tell you about." Wan Wan was different from Xiaobai. After knowing that the beautiful big sister in front of her was the Empress of the Great Zhou, she was a little restrained. She grew up in the Immortals' capital and had a very strong sense of hierarchy. She didn't dare to imagine that Xiaobai actually dared to call the Empress Big Sister Zhou. After a while, she pulled Xiaobai into the room. Li Mu gave up his seat and said, "Your Majesty, have some grapes." Zhou Yi sat in Li Mu's seat and said, "The imperial court found out from the spies in the demon sect that some elders of the demon sect were furious because of the Nether Saint's death. It's best that you stay in the Immortals' capital from now on and don't go out casually." Li Mu nodded and then asked, "Is your Majesty's injury all right?" Zhou Yi shook her head and said, "It's fine. I'll be fine after a few days of rest." When a transcendent expert sent their avatar from afar, if they didn't sacrifice others, they would have to sacrifice themselves. The myriad illusion monarch naturally wouldn't sacrifice his own cultivation for Cui Ming. If he knew that the Empress didn't hesitate to get injured for him, Li Mu would also be willing to stab himself a few times like Cui Ming. Li Mu bowed and said, "Thank you, Your Majesty, for saving my life." Zhou Yi said indifferently, "You're working for me. I won't let anyone hurt you." Li Mu was slightly moved. As the Empress of a country, she was willing to go to such extent for a subject. This made him feel that all his previous efforts were worth it. Night. In a dream, Li Mu dreamt that he fought with the Nether Saint for dozens of rounds and still wasn't a match for him. Just when he was about to lose his life, a familiar figure suddenly descended from the sky. The Empress hugged Li Mu, who was sent flying by the Nether Saint, and landed on the ground. She then raised her hand and gently pointed at the Nether Saint. With this point, the Nether Saint's soul body directly collapsed and dissipated between heaven and earth. The Empress looked at Li Mu and said gently, "I won't let anyone hurt you." Li Mu sat up from the bed with a blank expression. Chapter 345. Li Mu sat on the bed for 2 hours. After careful analysis, he felt that the reason he kept having these kinds of dreams was because he relied on the Empress too much. Other people were always the hero saving the damsel in distress, but he was always waiting for the damsel to save him. Over time, his subconscious would be affected. Li Mu didn't want to completely fall to the point of relying on a woman's protection. He decided to take the initiative to do something. If he could make the Empress rely on him, perhaps she would be the one having these kinds of dreams in the future. But she was the Empress of the Great Zhou, and also a 7th realm cultivator. If she couldn't handle someone, Li Mu couldn't either. How could he become the Empress's reliance? After deep thought, the only thing he could rely on was probably his cooking skills. Although his cooking skills couldn't compare to the imperial chefs in the palace, it was obvious that the Empress was used to eating delicacies and preferred his home-cooked meals. When she completely got used to Li Mu's cooking and couldn't leave Li Mu's side, it would be time for him to take the initiative. After the morning court session ended, the Empress's figure appeared in the courtyard of the Li Manor as usual. Li Mu rolled up his sleeves and said enthusiastically, "Your Majesty, you're out of court. What do you want to eat today?" "I'll make it for you." Zhou Yi thought for a moment and said, "Crucian carp tofu soup." "Okay, Your Majesty, please wait here for a moment." Li Mu smiled and walked towards the kitchen. Halfway there, he suddenly stopped. He realized that he seemed to have gone in the wrong direction. He was a favored official. Why did he always do what a favored concubine should do? He made an official into a concubine. No wonder he often had those strange dreams at night. So this was the reason. If this continued, not only would the situation not improve, but it would also worsen. It was never too late to mend the pen after the sheep were lost. Li Mu waved to the two girls in the corner and said, Xiaobai, Wanwan, you two go cook. I have something to discuss with Sister Zhou. Li Mu walked to the Empress and sat down. He asked, Your Majesty, how are you suppressing your inner demons? Zhou Yi glanced at Li Mu and said, He hasn't appeared for a long time. When Li Mu heard this, he breathed a sigh of relief. The heart demon of the seventh realm was extraordinary. Since ancient times, there have been many powerhouses in the upper realm who were not destroyed by the enemy but were destroyed by the heart demon. Li Mu didn't want the Empress to die because of the heart demon. When it came to inner demons, the clear heart art could only treat the symptoms, but not the root cause. In the end, she still had to rely on herself. Speaking of the art of tranquility, Li Mu had originally planned to draw some high-level Fu Lu with the help of the Empress's mana after returning to the Immortals' capital. Later, he realized that he had already taught the art of tranquility to the Empress, so she could draw it herself. High-level Fu Lu was very attractive to cultivators. This was a rare cultivation resource. A saint-level Tianji talisman could allow a half-step transcendence cultivator to work for the imperial court for several years. The Tianji talisman didn't just increase their lifespan, it also increased their chances of breaking through to the transcendence realm. Heaven-level and earth-level Fu Lu weren't very attractive to sixth realm cultivators, but they were still very attractive to those below the sixth realm. There were very few sixth realm cultivators. Most of the fourth and fifth realm cultivators were the mainstays of the cultivation world. Li Mu thought for a moment and looked at the Empress. He said, The art of tranquility that I taught your Majesty can not only be used to calm your Tao heart, but also to increase the success rate of drawing a talisman. As long as there are enough treasures to make talisman fluid, your Majesty can easily draw saint-level Fu Lu with your cultivation. You can use the Fu Lu to recruit more powerhouses for the imperial court. The Empress looked at him and said, I have already discovered that this art can increase the success rate of drawing a talisman. However, it seems to be limited to Fu Lu below the heaven level. Those above the heaven level will still fail. This time, it was Li Mu's turn to be surprised. He knew the effects of the art of tranquility better than anyone else. Not to mention the heaven level, even the saint level could be easily drawn as long as there was enough transcendence energy to support it. Why didn't it work when it came to the Empress? Li Mu was puzzled. He asked, Your Majesty has already tried it? The Empress nodded. After confirming with the Empress again, Li Mu fell into deep thought. It was the same art. There was no reason to favor boys over girls. The Empress looked at him and said, You were the one who drew the heaven-level Fu Lu on Mount Baiyun. Li Mu nodded and said, Your Majesty already knows. Li Mu didn't tell her much about the details of the trial, but he couldn't hide it from her. The Empress was silent for a moment. Suddenly she asked, The master that you mentioned called Laozi is actually yourself, right? Li Mu was shocked. He hurriedly said, Your Majesty, why do you say that? The Empress glanced at him and said softly, When Tao techniques are first born, they will be recognized by heaven and earth. Only their creator can unleash their strongest power. It's the same for the art. This is the rule of heaven and earth. There is only one reason why my art of tranquility is inferior to yours. The Empress's words made Li Mu think of Xiao Yu. Although he couldn't use Xiao Yu's Tao technique, Xiao Yu's Tao technique didn't have any effect on him. Li Mu could dissipate her Taoist technique with just a thought. In other words, whether it was the art of tranquility or the 9 syllables, as long as it was Li Mu who brought them to this world for the first time, he was their creator. Even if the people who came after could learn it, they would never be able to reach his level. Using his Tao technique to attack him was suicide. However, the fact that he didn't have a master was exposed in front of the Empress. Li Mu said awkwardly, Your Majesty, actually? Zhou waved her hand and said, This is your secret. You don't have to explain it to me. Li Mu looked at her and said, There are some things that I can't tell you, Your Majesty. However, I swear by heaven that my heart has always been with Your Majesty. I am loyal to Your Majesty and am willing to go through fire and water for Your Majesty. I won't hesitate to die 1,000 times. Zhou said, I don't want you to go through fire and water. Go and cook. I like to eat the dishes you make. Li Mu rolled up his sleeves again. Okay. 2 days later, in the secretariat. It had been many days since he returned to the capital. It was even longer than his 3-month holiday. After taking Wan Wan to see her old friends at the wonderful music lane and accompanying her and Xiaobai to walk around Shen, due for 2 days, Li Mu finally stepped through the gates of the secretariat. After the imperial examinations ended, the empress transferred him to the secretariat. His official position was the secretariat censor. His rank was not high, but it was extremely important. He usually participated in national affairs. After the guard at the door reported, Lu Yi walked out of a yamen and said, "Lord Li, you're finally here." Li Mu saluted him and said, "We'll be officials in the same yamen in the future. Please take care of me. Assistant Minister Lu." Lu Yi smiled and said, "We're all colleagues. We should take care of each other. I'll take Lord Li to your yamen." In the secretariat, there were 6 secretariat censors. They were the backbone of the yamen. Each of them had a yamen that corresponded to the affairs of the 6 ministries. Li Mu took over Lu Yi's original position and was in charge of the Ministry of Justice. The secretariat censors didn't specifically interfere with the operations of the ministries. However, they had the responsibility of supervising and guiding the official affairs of the ministries. Li Mu's yamen was very large. When he walked in, the table in the yamen was neatly piled with memorials. Lu Yi said, "Lord Li, you haven't been in the yamen for the past 3 months. These memorials have to be dealt with as soon as possible. There are many affairs in the secretariat. If you don't deal with them in time, they will pile up." Li Mu nodded and said, "I know." Lu Yi smiled and said, "Lord Li, you just came to the yamen. If there's anything you don't understand, feel free to ask me." After seeing Lu Yi off, Li Mu sat down and used a short time to familiarize himself with the unfamiliar surroundings. Then, he began to deal with the memorials on the table. Among the 6 ministries, the Ministry of Justice had the most affairs. Especially after the law reform, the serious cases in each county had to be submitted to the Ministry of Justice for review, then to the Secretariat for review, and finally to the Empress for approval. Most of the memorials on Li Mu's table were such memorials. Human lives were at stake. Li Mu read through these reports very carefully. If there were any suspicious points or omissions, he would put them aside and wait until he went back and re-examined them. As for those that had solid evidence, they were just going through the process. They would be put aside and handed over to the Empress for her approval. There were a lot of memorials piled up in the past 3 months. Li Mu had read less than half of them from the yamen to the yamen. He picked up the last one and prepared to go home after reading it. The rest of the memorials should be finished in 2 days. Li Mu opened the memorial. This memorial was from Danyang County. It was sent by the county chief of Danyang County. In the memorial, it said that a few months ago, the county chief of Ani County of Danyang County was assassinated. Danyang County had reported this case to the Ministry of Justice several times, but there was no response. They had no choice but to submit the memorial directly to the Secretariat. Li Mu put away the memorial with a puzzled expression. The assassination of a 7th-grade official was related to the dignity of the imperial court. The death of the county chief of Anyang County had caused a huge uproar in the North County. What was the Ministry of Justice doing? Such a big thing, but they didn't report it. Chapter 346. P.S. It's almost midnight. I can't finish writing. This chapter has 2001 words. I'll update it first and then write a few hundred words. You can subscribe first and refresh the chapter half an hour later or tomorrow morning. The extra words won't cost you anything. It took Li Mu 3 days to deal with the backlog of memorials during this period of time. Other than the 2 memorials beside him, the table in front of him was empty. The contents of the 2 memorials were very similar. The county magistrate of Ani County of Danyang County was assassinated a few months ago. A month later, a deputy county magistrate of Tianhe County of Hanyang County was also assassinated. Although there were many places in Great Zhou where demons and ghosts wreaked havoc and disturbed the lives of the people, it was rare for an official to be killed. Murdering an official of the imperial court was a capital offense. The Ministry of Justice had always been strict in investigating such acts that challenged the authority of the imperial court. These 2 memorials were submitted by Danyang County and Hanyang County. They should have directly notified the Ministry of Justice when their local officials were assassinated. However, the Ministry of Justice had not dealt with these 2 cases after receiving the requests from the 2 counties. The officials of the 2 counties had no choice but to send the memorials directly to the Hall of Secretaries. Li Mu had originally planned to send these 2 memorials to the Hall of Secretaries and have them send it to the Ministry of Justice to urge them to implement it as soon as possible. However, if he followed this process of sending the memorials from the Hall of Secretaries to the Hall of Secretaries, then from the Hall of Secretaries to the Ministry of Justice, then from the Ministry of Justice to the Hall of Secretaries, then from the Hall of Secretaries to the Hall of Secretaries. This round trip would probably take half a year. The backlog of memorials had been dealt with. Li Mu left the Hall of Secretaries, walked out of the palace gates, and went to the Ministry of Justice's yamen. "Greetings, Lord Li. Long time no see, Lord Li. Lord Li, come have a pear." After leaving Fairy's capital for 3 months, the people seemed to be more welcoming to him. Li Mu munched on a pear and leisurely went to the Ministry of Justice's yamen. The constable at the entrance of the Ministry of Justice was shocked when he saw Li Mu. Li Mu asked, "Is there an official in the Ministry of Justice in the yamen?" The bailiff replied, "The minister and the assistant minister are not here. The doctor is investigating the case." Li Mu stood outside the court and waited for the director of the Ministry of Justice to finish the case. He glanced at the courtroom and saw someone who surprised him. Li Mu looked back at the bailiff and asked, "Why is Wei Peng in the Ministry of Justice?" If he remembered correctly, Wei Peng should have failed the imperial examinations. At this moment, Li Mu saw him in the court of the Ministry of Justice. He seemed to be wearing official robes. Although the rank was very low, it was indeed official robes. The constable said, "Sir, are you talking about Manager Wei?" "Manager Wei was specially recruited by Sir Lang Zhong 3 months ago," Li Mu said in surprise. "Specially recruited by the Ministry of Justice." Li Mu was the one who set up the imperial examination system, so he naturally knew what special recruitment was all about. When he set up the imperial examination system, in order to recruit special talents, after the imperial examinations, other than the grand scholars on the honor roll of Azure Clouds, each of the 6 ministries had a quota to specially recruit 1 person from the examinees who failed the roll. After discussing with a few officials of the Secretariat, he made some restrictions on this quota. For example, even if it was a specially recruited person, they had to pass every subject of the imperial examination. Furthermore, they had to have outstanding results in one subject to meet the requirements of special recruitment. After the ministries proposed special recruitment, the Secretariat would discuss and make a decision before it was finally implemented. There was only one reason why Wei Peng could appear here. That was because of his outstanding results in criminal law. That was why the Ministry of Justice made an exception and specially recruited him outside of the 100 grand scholars. Li Mu looked at the court of the Ministry of Justice with interest. In the court, the director of the Ministry of Justice knocked on the gavel. He looked at the 2 people kneeling in front of the court and said, "Brother and Sister Zhang, do you admit to killing Su Shi?" The man kneeling in front of the court said, "Sir, please judge clearly. It was Su Shi who brought his servants and broke into my house in the middle of the night. He wanted to defile my sister. He had the servants control me, but I struggled to break free. I was anxious to save my sister, so I smashed his head with a jar," the director of the Ministry of Justice said. "But in the end, you and your sister are fine. Su Shi is dead, so you naturally have to take responsibility for his death." The man said with grief and indignation, "Am I supposed to just watch him defile my sister?" The director of the Ministry of Justice said, "You could have stopped him, but you killed him. Since it was an unintentional mistake and Su Shi was in the wrong first, I can give you a lighter sentence." The man lowered his head and said with a miserable voice, "He broke into my house time and time again, wanting to do something to my sister. I went to the yamen 3 times, but you didn't do anything. I just wanted to protect my sister. What crime is there? Where is the justice?" The director of the Ministry of Justice rubbed his forehead and said, "I said before that Su Shi did not harm you, but you killed him. This is excessive self-defense. I will now follow the law." "Sir, please wait." The director of the Ministry of Justice was about to pass judgment when a voice suddenly came from the court. The director of the Ministry of Justice looked at the figure that walked out from the corner and immediately felt a headache coming on. Wei Peng had been in the Ministry of Justice for 3 months. He had opposed him in court for 3 months. As a result, he felt a headache coming on as soon as the court started. He wanted nothing more than to have the yamen runners throw Wei Peng out. But he could not really do that, because it was the assistant minister who had given him the privilege to have Wei Peng raise questions during the trial. He looked at Wei Peng and said through gritted teeth, "Manager Wei, what is it now?" Wei Peng walked into the court and raised his head to ask, "Sir, according to what you said, Su Shi did not harm the women of Zhang Shi. Zhang Shi's self-defense was excessive. Then how should he defend himself? Could it be that he has to wait until Su Shi harmed the women of Zhang Shi before he can defend himself?" The director of the Ministry of Justice said, "Of course, that is not what I meant." Wei Peng continued, "According to what you said, if Su Shi harmed the women of Zhang Shi, they planned to leave the Zhang family and did not continue to harm them. At this time, if Zhang Shi counterattacked, would that not be taking the initiative to attack?" The director of the Ministry of Justice said, "Of course, according to the law." Wei Peng looked at the director of the Ministry of Justice and asked, "Sir, you are familiar with the law. Then please tell me, when can Zhang Shi counterattack?" The director of the Ministry of Justice rubbed his forehead. "This," Wei Peng said in a heavy voice. "Sir, if Zhang Shi was attacked by a group of villains in the middle of the night and wanted to defile your wife, what would you do? Could it be that you still have to consider when you should defend yourself? Is it after they defile your wife or after they draw a sword and slash you?" The director of the Ministry of Justice was speechless. Wei Peng did not wait for him to speak and continued, "The law is used to protect innocent people, not villains. This official believes that the Zhang siblings are not guilty. Su Shi entered their home in the middle of the night and plotted against them. She deserved to die. The Su family should compensate the Zhang siblings for this case." The director of the Ministry of Justice thought carefully and seemed to have been convinced by Wei Peng. He sighed and slammed the gavel. "This official now pronounces that Su Shi trespassed and committed murder. She deserved to die. The Zhang siblings are not guilty. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for upholding justice for us." The Zhang siblings were moved to tears. They knelt on the ground and kowtowed to Wei Peng. Wei Peng tidied his collar and straightened his official hat. "No need to thank me. This is what I should do."